What are you seeing right now?
hmm Well, right now there are a lot of officials on scene. So we can see police, we can see fire trucks, we can see ambulances along the way. Just to my right here is Finch. So you'd have to travel south down that way to Shepherd. So it's quite a busy street. This is a busy section of the city. We talked to one witness who said that he did see this driver, that he had stopped at one point during his drive. So it was kind of an interesting bit of information that he had seen. He thought that perhaps they looked like a young person who seemed a bit angry as he was driving, and that was just from his perspective. But witnesses here saying that this is really quite a traumatic scene. I'm standing right up against the police tape right here. But this is blocked off for quite a large section. So you've been talking about TTC not running, the subway not running. They're not running a shuttle bus through this area, of course, because this is blocked off. So we're waiting to learn more about details. Of course, we don't know why this van did what it did, but from witness accounts, it did jump the curb and hit pedestrians along the way. Again, we don't know for sure what happened, the details about that, or just how many pedestrians may have been hit.
And Jacqueline, since you've had a chance to speak with some of the witnesses where you are, and they've told you a little bit about perhaps seeing the driver, and they described him, what are they saying about those people who may have been struck by the van?
Yeah, so one pedestrian, or one witness in particular, he said that he saw the van hit an older woman, and he went to help that older woman afterwards, but that it was quite shocking. And just that this sort of scene unraveled in a way that he could not have expected. And he was just very shocked to see this, as he described, young man look the way that he did while he was driving. But of course, we don't know, Artie, just why exactly this man would have done this if pardon me, I'm saying this man was doing it. We know that someone is in custody and that he's been described as a young man, but we don't know those details just yet.
And we are still waiting for police. We expect that they will hold a briefing to bring everyone up to speed on what unfolded this afternoon. But what have police been saying about the arrest that's been made? Do we know anything about that?
RT, I don't have any extra information to bring you in terms of what the police are saying about this arrest. But you were talking about the van. We had some more information about the van, the rental company talking about that. But we don't have any more information just yet. We are waiting, just as you are, for that update.
All right, thank you for the latest. That is the CBC's Jacqueline Hansen in Toronto. And a reminder again of the breaking news out of Toronto. Police say several people have been struck by a van in the north of the city. The driver of the van is now in custody. The extent of the injuries is unknown at this point, but witnesses report seeing bodies covered by tarps on the street. We will bring you more information as soon as we have it. Stay with us. You're watching CBC News Network.
We are live here on CBC News Network. I'm Ian Hannah-Mansing, and we have breaking news from Toronto. Police are reporting that several people have been injured after being struck by a van. The driver of that vehicle is now in custody. The extent of the injuries are unknown at this point, but witnesses have reported seeing bodies covered by tarps on the street. And we do have reporters on the scene, and they're trying to gather information, including Marlene Habib of CBCNews.ca. She joins us by phone. And you spoke to the police a short while ago. What did they tell you, Marlene?
Hi, Ian. How are you? Basically, the officer, he's a corporal with the Army. They've brought in some Army personnel to help cordon the area off, make sure people aren't walking into the yellow stripes. He basically said that they're trying to reroute people. They've closed the streets between Shepherd and Finch, which is several blocks in up suburban Toronto. Basically, he didn't see the actual accident, but I've spoken to people who've said they're horrified and they just didn't know what to do, so they're trying to get away from the area, even though, you know, it's kind of under control now.
Yeah, as you speak to us, we're looking at some footage from that area, and it does look, as you suggest, under control. Certainly a lot different than what we've heard from eyewitnesses at the time. The chaos, the confusion, the trauma of seeing that van plow into people on the sidewalk. Describe for us where you are right now and what you're seeing.
So basically, I'm at the corner of a street. It's just around the corner from where the van accident happened. It's just off the Shepherd subway line. So I'm just west of Shepherd. And there's a lot of construction going on there right now. So people are coming off the subway, and a lot of people may not even know what's going on. They've rerouted the subway back from Shepherd to downtown. They're not allowing anybody past there. But people are just confused. Some people don't even know what happened, and others do. But the Army personnel are just trying to make sure people are, like, they're not giving a lot of information except to say that they want people to stay away from the area and reroute and use the alleyways rather than the streets, because those have all been shut off. Basically, it's just a lot of fear. They're like, a couple of people said to me, I don't even know how this can happen in a city like this. Really, we thought everything was so calm, and here today, you know, Kate Middleton gives birth to a baby, and here we're dealing with this horrific thing in Toronto. And
of course, what makes it even more unsettling is we don't know what the motive is, right? And so a lot of people are quick to speculate what it might be, and some of that speculation, I think, is probably adding to the level of anxiety. But what we do know is that there has been this horrible collision. There have been certainly at least injuries, and as we've said, eyewitnesses talking about seeing bodies or people under tarps at the scene. And so yeah, so even the people who were right there, quite anxious and quite concerned about what's going on. And, you know, one of the interesting things that you mentioned, Marlene, is the police telling you that they're using people from the Army to do crowd control, which seems unusual. Why are they doing that?
I'm not sure. I think they just feel like, with the scope of things, I don't want to speculate either, but obviously maybe they think this is beyond just somebody in accident. You know, just from my instinct as a journalist, I know they don't do that out of the ordinary. So.
Well, and I guess the other thing is we do have a G7 ministers conference going on in Toronto right now. So I remember yesterday, for example, near the CBC Broadcast Centre, just basically in the heart of downtown Toronto, there were a lot of police officers who were here for that meeting. They would still presumably be deployed in large numbers today as well. So it's quite possible that you know, that's a factor here, right?
Well, I think it's important too. My family was texting me as I was off the subway saying, are you okay? And I said, well, I'm out in the suburb right now. It's not downtown Toronto. It is, you know, North York area. So people are thinking, you know, equating it with downtown Toronto. It's not downtown. It's an area, a little, although quite renovated, you know, a lot of new shops and condos and, you know, right near actually North York City Hall. And I understand John Tory is there. So, you know, it is a pretty cosmopolitan area still, but it's not right downtown Toronto.
Yeah, we're talking to Marlene Habib of CBCNews.ca, who's near the scene of this van collision. And just stand by for a second, but you know, a lot of people will be tuning in throughout the hour across the country, and I just want to bring people up to speed. We do know that just before 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, a white van struck pedestrians near Mel Lastman Square, and as we heard, sort of in the Greater Toronto area, but quite far north of downtown. We do know that there were injuries. We do know that eyewitnesses say that there were people under tarps in that area. We don't know the magnitude of the injuries. We don't know, really the key thing here is the motive of the driver, though we do know that the driver was arrested. And Marlene, I just want to quickly come back to you. And just one other thing, especially for the people who aren't from Toronto, you talked a little bit about this area, and I mentioned Mel Lastman Square. The pictures we're seeing look like just a busy intersection in a busy city. But tell us about the scene of this collision and where it was in relation to Mel Lastman Square.
So there's a street called Poyntz, P-O-Y-N-T-Z, and it's just further towards Finch Avenue and just, I guess, east of that street. And that's where all the hub is. There's like Civic Center, and then there's Mel Lastman Square. It is a very touristy area, and with a beautiful day today, I'm sure there are a lot of people out. And it is an area where they're building lots of condos and lots of shopping centers. There's a library right around that area as well. So it's a well-populated area.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And no doubt we'll be coming back to you as our live coverage continues here on CBC News Network. Just before the top of the hour, I want to bring Arthi Pohl back, who, of course, has been guiding us through this live coverage. You've been watching this story as it develops. And, at this point, very few details we have. But tell us what those details are.
Ian, there is some new information we're also learning. So as you have recapped for our viewers, this happened at about 1:30 in the afternoon involving a van jumping the curb in the area of Yonge and Sheppard in the north of Toronto, striking several pedestrians. We know the numbers right now are fluid. Some new information we're learning is that the Sunnybrook Health Sciences Centre is also saying that the hospital's emergency department has been locked down as an added precaution. They have confirmed they have at least 7 people who are being treated there that is related to this particular incident. And we've been speaking this afternoon as well with a number of witnesses who saw this happen either as it was going on or directly after. And we actually have a clip here of one of those witnesses and what he had to say.
All the sirens and everything, and I look out the window, I saw that guy lying over there dead from upstairs. So
you were upstairs,
yeah,
on the construction site.
Yeah, I was on the 4th floor and I saw everything. So.
All right, and so that was one of the witnesses. And I also want to make mention that certainly we've been talking about a lot of reaction from the Prime Minister, but also we've got some new information here from the Premier, from Kathleen Wynne, and she has told reporters that she has been briefed by the National Security Advisor and that she wants people to know that all levels of government and police services are working together. We know an investigation is underway as well, Ian.
All right, Arthi, thank you very much, and you'll be staying with me live as we continue our coverage here. What we want to do is stay on this story, and if you've been watching our coverage for a while now, I'm sure you've noticed that we are repeating a lot of the basic facts over and over again, but we are aware of the fact that besides those of you who have been sticking with us for a while, there are a lot of people who are tuning in at different times. We want to bring them up to speed. The other thing we want to do is, with all of the rumors on social media and on the street in that area that are swirling around, we want to be a place where we can kind of listen to that stuff, talk to the authorities, filter it for you, and give you the information that we're able to verify as opposed to the rumors that are out there. So if you stick with us, we are going to take you through that throughout the afternoon. We're coming up to 4 o'clock here Eastern, which is what, about 2.5 hours since this incident happened. We're live here on CBC News Network. I'm Ian Hannah-Mansing, and our coverage will continue at the top of the hour. And so welcome back to our continuing coverage here on CBC News Network. I'm Ian Hannamansing, and we are covering a story live at this point where, although we don't have very many details, the details we do have are disturbing, of a van that climbed onto a sidewalk in Toronto. And we do know that a number of pedestrians were hit, but we are also waiting to find out how many pedestrians were hit, the extent of their injuries. We do know, as Arthi Pole told us just a few minutes ago, that 7 people, I think it was, have been moved to Sunnybrook Hospital, which is a major trauma hospital in the area, and has been that hospital been locked down for precautions.
I had just stepped out and lit a cigarette. When I did that, I turned up my head and I saw the van hit a man walking through the intersection. It was a green light.
And so, as I mentioned, 7 people in hospital after that van plowed into pedestrians at a major intersection. The police do have the driver of the vehicle in custody. The Prime Minister speaking shortly after the incident.
Obviously, we're just learning about the situation in Toronto. Our hearts go to anyone affected.
And Toronto's Mayor John Tory also speaking shortly after this happened.
Anything that we can do as a city government will be done to work with the emergency responders.
And we're waiting to hear from a lot of people on this, including the Minister of Public Safety, Ralph Goodale. We're expecting that at any moment now, and I believe he is in Toronto for those G7 meetings. In any event, we are waiting to hear from him. And the Mayor, John Tory, we saw that clip from him shortly after the incident happened. He's expected to give an update on this coming up at the bottom of the hour, so that'll be 4:30 Eastern Time. So, on CBC News Network, you would normally be watching On the Money, but we are bringing you the special coverage of the situation that is unfolding here in Toronto. And let me go through those basic facts once again for you. The van striking pedestrians around a busy intersection of Yonge and Finch in the city's north. Multiple people have been injured. A local hospital, Sunnybrook, says it is now caring for 7 patients, and police do have the driver of the van in custody. Arthi Pole has been tracking the latest on this story over the last couple of hours, and what can you tell us?
Well, we can recap some of those main points that we know that it occurred at about 1:30 in the afternoon around the intersection of Yonge and Shepherd in the north of Toronto. Again, we've been discussing how this is quite a busy area of the city. This is a busy subway station that is right around there. It's also a busy intersection. There's residential, there is commercial as well. There are some businesses that have in fact been put on lockdown as a precautionary measure. We also talked about how Sunnybrook Hospital, a local trauma center, has also had their emergency area put on lockdown again as a precaution as they continue to deal with the situation. 7 people, at least 7 people confirmed to have been taken there. You're looking at images of when it all unfolded. We know that the area had to be blocked off, so traffic is not getting in and out. Some of the latest information also, as you mentioned, John Tory, the mayor, will be speaking of Toronto, will be speaking at around 4:30, so we will be watching for that. We did get a chance to speak with a number of witnesses. Some came to the area directly as this was happening or in the immediate aftermath, described seeing clothes and shoes on the ground of pedestrians, and in fact also describing seeing a number of people with tarps covering up their bodies. So some very gruesome scenes here. But we do have a witness that we spoke to just to play for our viewers right now.
Sirens and everything, and I look out the window, I saw that guy lying over there dead from upstairs. So
you were upstairs on the construction site.
I was on the 4th floor and I saw everything. So.
All right, so that was one of the witnesses. We know that we're waiting, standing by to hear from the mayor. We expect police will be doing an updated briefing soon. We've heard from the Prime Minister, from all 3 federal leaders, really, and also Ontario's Premier also reacting, saying that all levels of government are cooperating as they respond to the situation again that happened, about 2.5 hours ago in Toronto.
I'm sure a lot of people who are watching are thinking about this, and that is the context of this kind of incident. I mean, you know, when a van runs into pedestrians, it could be an accident. It could be somebody who was drinking and driving. But it also, you know, history shows us, recent history shows us, that vehicles are sometimes used as weapons in acts of terror. And so people are wondering, is that the case here? We have no reason to believe that that's the case now, but the possibility is the reason why there's this high level of alert, and why we are continuing this coverage and waiting to find out what the motive is. So, you know, there are kind of two parts to our coverage at this point. One is to get a sense of the magnitude of what happened, and we'll continue to report on that. But the second part of it is why it happened. And based on why it happened, that might lead to other implications as well. You mentioned the Sunnybrook Hospital in, you know, adding to the security because some of the injured people are there. Not that, as far as we know, they have any specific reason to believe that those people are under threat, but just that's the level of concern, you know, that people have here. And so that's kind of the holding pattern we're in right now. The Public Safety Minister, Ralph Goodale, is speaking to reporters right now. Let's listen in.
Incident is under investigation at this moment by the Toronto Police Service.
That's right.
With the full and complete cooperation of the Ontario Provincial Police and the RCMP, as is appropriate, together with others. Police are doing their very best as rapidly as possible to identify precisely what has taken place here and why, but it is obviously a very serious incident. When further details can be announced, they will be by the appropriate police authorities. At the moment, however, the investigation is at a stage where no further detailed information can be confirmed at this point. I want to say that I have also been in touch this afternoon with my Ontario counterpart, Minister Marie-France Lalonde. As well, my office has been in very close touch through the afternoon with Mayor Tory's office, and I will be speaking with the Mayor a little bit later on this afternoon. There are obviously casualties in this incident. I cannot provide details at this stage, but I do want to extend thoughts and prayers to those who have suffered as a result of what has happened. I also want to express great admiration for the police and the other first responders who have been involved. As is always the case in these very difficult and tragic circumstances, first responders, police, paramedics, firefighters who are often the first on the scene, their behavior and their work is simply extraordinary, and we are very grateful to have them. Christia, you are Member of Parliament for Toronto. Maybe you would like to add a word at this stage.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ralph. As Ralph said, he and I are here for the G7 Security and Foreign Ministers meeting. For a moment, though, I'd like to speak to you as the Member of Parliament for University Rosedale and a member of the Toronto caucus, and really just to say how tragic this is, and that I think all of our hearts go out to the people hurt in this incident and to their families and loved ones. And as Ralph said, to really thank the police and the first responders for the courageous work they have done and are doing. So thank you very much. It's a very sad moment, and you know, I'm just very grateful to the people who are working hard on this.
The Toronto Police Service is the lead investigative agency in this matter, and I understand as soon as they are able to comment further with information or details, that they will be making the appropriate officers available. But until they are able to do that, it is not possible at this stage for us to speculate on the situation. I know that probably does not provide much of a base upon which you may ask questions, but if there are any questions pertaining to this situation that we can deal with at this stage, perhaps we should do that before moving into the G7 issues generally.
Minister Goodale, Murray Brewster with CBC News. What happened in north of Toronto today looks a lot like some of the terror incidents that took place in Europe. And I recognize and respect what you were saying about having to wait, but what kind of conclusion can the Canadian public draw when it sees this? Is this terrorism? And what sort of message do you think it sends to be having this kind of incident at the same time as you're meeting with your counterparts here of the G7?
Murray, we cannot come to any firm conclusions at this stage. The police are conducting, obviously, their thorough investigation to determine exactly what happened and why it happened, the motivations involved. But until they are able to provide us with details that put this completely in a factual context, it would be inappropriate to speculate. I can, though, say that there is complete cooperation and collaboration among all of the relevant police organizations to make sure that all the appropriate resources are made available and that we get the answers that you and the public would want just as rapidly as possible.
Thank you for taking the time to answer questions today. Minister Goodale, just following up on my colleague's comment, Michelle Zolio here with the Globe and Mail. Can you tell us about the risk to the public right now? Do you have any concerns about that?
There is no information available to me at the present time that would indicate a change in the risk level. The appropriate authorities of the Government of Canada, in collaboration with all of their relevant law enforcement partners, are constantly assessing and reassessing the nature of risk in the country from whatever source it may come. If they conclude that a change is appropriate, that decision is made by the key senior officials within the Government of Canada, but there is no information, and I think it's important to state this, there is no information available to me at the present time that would lead us to conclude that there should be a change in risk level.
Madame Freeland, si vous me permettez, serait-ce possible de vous poser la question en français? Oui. C'est-à-dire, vous avez tout à l'heure commenté en quelque sorte ce qui s'est produit. En français, s'il vous plaît.
OK, ça va. En tant que député du Toronto et une collègue de notre ministre Ralph Goodale, je veux dire que c'est un incident tragique. Je pense que les cœurs de tous nous, de tout le pays, sont avec les victimes et ses proches. Et je veux aussi remercier tous les services publics, tous les gens qui ont répondu à cet incident pour aider les gens et pour chercher les coupables. Maintenant, nous ne pouvons pas dire beaucoup.
Now, at this point, we really can't say much.
Les investigations ont commencé seulement
because
maintenant,
the investigation is beginning now, and I think it's important to allow the police to carry out that investigation. The people responsible for this work are the Toronto Police, and the federal government is working closely with the City of Toronto and the Toronto Police.
Thank you very much, David Clark from Agence France Presse. Obviously, you can't say very much about today's incident yet, but this meeting has been on the agenda for quite a while. Did you receive any information, any threats, any intelligence that there was any reason to consider that this meeting itself might be the target of anything? Thank you very much.
No, not to my knowledge, none at all.
Katie Simpson, CBC News. Minister Goodale, I know that you're in a position where there's a limited amount of information you can share, but we haven't heard from Toronto Police just yet in terms of the scope of just how tragic this incident is. Do you have any information about how many people may have been hurt, how many people may have been killed, any information like that that you can share, the specifics?
Katie, at this stage, no. If I were to use a number, it would be a speculative number, and I would rather not speculate on a situation that serious and tragic. As soon as the relevant information is available, I'm sure the Toronto Police Service will be making it available. They understand the importance of providing information to the public as quickly as it's possible to do that. And I think at this stage, those of us at the political level should avoid speculation. But they will be making themselves available later today.
Thank you, everyone. Merci. We'll now move to the remarks from Ministers Goodale and Freeland on their work today at the G7. Merci. Nous allons maintenant avoir les remarques des ministres sur le G7.
You go first? Oh, okay. So yes, and let me just begin by again expressing
okay, we're going to leave that news conference now as they talk about what was on the G7 agenda, but listening there to the Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale, Chrystia Freeland, our Cabinet Minister, of course, but also speaking as a Toronto area MP. And, you know, we heard, I think, very carefully, of course, carefully chosen words by the Public Safety Minister saying that there is absolutely no information that would lead him to change the threat level in Canada, but at the same time saying that there was no firm conclusion at this point as to what the motive was, to paraphrase him a little bit, but he was talking about the motive of this van collision in North Toronto. So interesting that he would say no firm conclusion, because you'd expect at this point the police have been talking to the driver, or at least trying to talk to the driver who has been arrested. Let's bring in my co-host Rosemary Barton, who's following this story from Ottawa. You've watched Ralph Goodale, Rosemary, in lots of different circumstances, and as you saw what he said there and his tone, what struck you?
Well, a couple things in regards to the threat level, something that the government obviously doesn't change easily. The last time the threat level in this country was changed was in October 2014, when Canada, of course, was hit with another terror attack here on Parliament Hill, but it has not changed from medium since that time, so for about 4 years. A couple other things I would just point out. It is strange, an odd coincidence, I guess, that G7 public safety ministers and foreign ministers are gathered there in Toronto. This is just a coincidence, although you heard him being asked the question by my colleague Murray Brewster about whether indeed this was more than a coincidence. He wouldn't go down that road yet. A couple other points that I think we should make sure viewers understand. Minister Goodale did say the word casualties, and although we haven't had confirmation from Toronto Police or the hospital yet, he seems to have information that indeed there have been some injuries or maybe even deaths in this situation. And as far as what he knows and who is involved at this stage, while everyone would be getting briefed right now, Ian, from the RCMP to the National Security Advisor to the Canadian military, it is still, and Minister Goodale made this very clear, the Toronto Police Service who remains the lead agency on this. And this is part of what I am told is regular sort of police procedure in these kinds of events. Local police head up the investigation until there is a determination that this may in fact be an issue of national security, at which point it would be taken over by the RCMP. So too soon, obviously, to say that for now. The minister wouldn't go down that road yet, but at some point, if that happens, that would be the reason why.
It is interesting. You would expect, I think, that the Minister Goodale would make sure that he had some level of information before speaking publicly. And, you know, it's also interesting to me, Rosemary, that not only did he make a statement, I guess they probably had a scheduled news conference on G7 matters, but that he took questions, right? That, you know, you see some situations where authorities would very tersely, read 2 or 3 lines or say, look, here, this is all we're going to say, and that's it, and then turn and leave the media there. But he actually said, I may not have much I can say to you, but ask questions if you will. And our Murray Brewster in that first question said, look, you look at these circumstances, a lot of people are going to think terrorism. Is this terrorism? And so he put himself out there to be asked those questions.
Yeah, and I assume that the minister or the prime minister, if these things start to get clarified in the next few hours, Ian, will be back to tell us more about what they know, if anything. As you well point out, the fact that the driver is still alive, the fact that the police managed to arrest him without shooting him, becomes a pretty key part of this investigation in terms of motivation. So I know we are expecting to hear from the mayor and Toronto Police Services within the next 30 minutes or so. I will keep in touch with the prime minister's office and Minister Goodale's office to see if there's other developments from their perspective.
Okay, Rosemary, thank you very much, and we, of course, will continue to come back to you. We are live here on CBC News Network and CBC Television, just past 20 after 4 Eastern Time in Toronto. The van running into pedestrians in North Toronto happening just about almost 3 hours ago now, and as you've heard, even the Minister of Public Safety, Federal Minister of Public Safety, waiting to hear details on motive, on the number of casualties, on details from the Toronto Police Service. We expect to hear from them. For those of you not in Toronto, I should point out, we've talked about the fact that this G7 meeting is going on in the city. One might think that that would be a target for somebody if they wanted to make a political point. Where this van collision happened is actually quite far from downtown Toronto, quite far from the G7. So take that for what it's worth. But it is interesting that it really is far outside the downtown core. But still, given the size of Toronto and how concentrated everything is, it still is in a very busy part of the city. We have reporters in the neighborhood where this collision happened, including the CBC's Jacqueline Hansen. And Jacqueline, describe first of all what you've been seeing.
Well, right now this area has been quite active, actually, Ian. The investigation is really going on, and you can see it. There were officials walking behind me, putting chalk sort of markings, orange markings on the ground as they sort of made their way down the street. So Yonge Street is right behind me. I am just south of Finch, and then Shepherd would be down to my left, a ways down that way. And so this is the sort of section of the road that we've been paying so much attention to. And I'm just, you can see I'm right up against the police tape here. And there are police cars, there's fire trucks, ambulances, and just a lot of activity going on right behind me here, as well as a lot of people coming up to the tape to just see what's happening in their neighborhood.
And what are people there saying about what they have seen?
Yeah, I spoke to one witness here, and he said that he was in his car at the time when he saw this van coming. This witness said that he did see a young man in the van, that the young man that he saw, he said he looked distraught, and that it was quite a dramatic emotion that he saw on this man's face as he was driving. At one time, the witness says that the man had braked and then kept going, which he, thought was quite something that he remembered distinctly. But again, this is from this one witness's perspective. But he also saw that, some pedestrians were hit along the way, and, quite a distressing scene here for those witnesses, Ian.
And early on, looking at the range of possibilities, one thing we wondered is it possible the driver had some kind of medical distress, and that's why there was this collision? But he continued to drive, which doesn't rule out medical distress, but he continued to drive, and he was eventually arrested by police. And do you know anything more about the arrest?
No, I'm away from where that would have happened. The arrest would have happened. I'm closer to Finch than to Shepherd, and if he was traveling south down Yonge, he would be at that end of Yonge. But, this is a very very busy street in Toronto. You mentioned that this isn't right downtown. It's quite a bit north in the city, but this is normally a very busy street, so it's quite unusual to see it as much as it's busy with the police traffic, but no car traffic here. But in terms of the arrest itself, we haven't been, privy to any extra information about that. But, just sort of the witness accounts talking about who it was that they saw and the sort of emotion in that person's face, that's all we have to really, try to understand at this point. But, we're waiting, as you are, for more information on those details as to, what exactly happened. We can see the scene here, but we don't know exactly what happened, and to try to understand why.
All right, Jacqueline Hansen live near the scene of the collision. Thank you very much. We are expecting to hear from the Mayor of Toronto, perhaps within the next 4 or 5 minutes at the bottom of the hour. And of course, Toronto Police Service, as we heard from the Minister of Public Safety, Ralph Goodale, still in the lead on this investigation, and he's waiting for a briefing from them. We, of course, are very much waiting to hear more details from them. But Toronto paramedics were speaking to reporters a little earlier. Let's listen to that.
And people have come to the hospital, most recently an 8th patient in critical condition.
I can either confirm or not confirm that. I just arrived on the scene of the hospital. But multiple people were injured, multiple people were deceased, but that's all I can tell you right now.
How many people at the scene do you think were dead?
I don't have those numbers right now. We're still tabulating that information.
Can you have numbers in terms of total victims?
I do not at this time.
John, take us back to the scene for a moment, because I just wanted to catch up here. You mentioned you just arrived here at the hospital.
At the hospital, yes.
How would you describe the scene? We have heard absolute chaos.
That's a good way to describe it, absolutely. From, like I said, for anywhere from the Yonge and Finch area all the way down to the Yonge and Shepherd area, was just, there was debris, there was clothing, there was police units, fire units, ambulance units everywhere.
We know that there was
like that? No, I have not.
And how long have you been?
I've been on the job, in my 21st year.
We know that there are at least 8 people that have been transported here to hospital, but some of the witnesses we've been chatting with at the scene say they saw this vehicle plow through about 40 people. You said you saw debris and clothing scattered everywhere. What would your assessment be? In terms of what you saw, would you say dozens of people might have been injured in the path of this vehicle?
It's very possible. It's very possible. A lot of people were injured. A lot of people were injured on the scene. Many people were transported outside. I don't have those numbers, unfortunately.
How do you deal with when you've got such a large number of victims? Tell us about all the parts that come into play on your part in terms of getting them all to the hospital, getting them to care of them.
Well, we're in close communication with our dispatch, with our commanders. Basically, we move over to a designated channel that we communicate on because we have other calls going on in the city, so we still have to address the needs of patients around the city that aren't involved in this particular situation. So in this situation, we have a designated channel. We try to dispatch as many ambulances that are available to the scene to transport as many patients, depending on their level of injury, to the hospitals, and we transported to various hospitals, trauma centers and non-trauma centers alike. And basically, in that regards, we want to get everybody off scene in a timely manner to help them out as fast as we can.
How many people would you say you transported in total?
Those numbers I don't have. Like I said, we're just sending them out as they become available.
What other hospitals have they gone to?
What are some of the challenges for you guys getting to this? Because it's quite a busy area of the city.
Absolutely. So we have the traffic as well. I mean, it was a time of day that rush hour traffic had not started. So moving around, of course, you have Yonge Street closing now, but we do have our lights and sirens. And as long as we're driving in a responsible manner, but we want to get to the scene as fast as we can in a safe manner.
John, just so we're clear, one spokesperson with the hospital has confirmed to the media that one person has died. Now, I know you're just arriving back at the hospital, but you were saying from what you saw at the scene, you believe this is a situation with multiple fatalities, based on your professional assessment.
From what we were surmising, multiple patients with potential multiple fatalities, yes.
Okay, so that's interesting at the end there, right? The paramedic who's being very careful about what he knows and what he doesn't know, but he said basically what he saw there is consistent with multiple fatalities. He's not confirming that because he realizes it's not his position to confirm it, but you know, for all intents and purposes, there is a paramedic saying, based on what he saw at the scene, he would expect multiple fatalities. We are waiting to hear from the Toronto Police Service and the mayor. That should happen any moment now, but before we do that, we'll take you there to that news conference as soon as it happens. Let's bring in Arthi Pohl once again, and we have some new video.
Yes, we do. And again, a reminder for our viewers, because this is such a fluid, developing story right now, we certainly want to make sure that there is transparency for our viewers, but also to make sure that we are not prematurely showing any video or sharing any information that could either compromise the investigation or could lead to any sort of complex, challenging situation that could compromise anything. But we do have some video now that it has been approved for us to share with you. And this is actually video that appears to show Toronto police arresting the suspect who may have been behind the wheel of that van. So let's quickly take a look at that arrest, and we'll play that video for you now. This is not the video that we have. I believe we will be airing it shortly. To our newsroom from social media. Of course, we know a lot of people are reacting on social media, which is why it took us so long to make sure that this was a video that was verified from the scene and that was an accurate depiction of what appears to be the police taking down the suspect. I'm also monitoring, of course, what we're hearing from police. They are expected to speak, as you mentioned, with the mayor at 4:30 p.m. Also want to make mention in regards to the vehicle that was being used. It was a rental vehicle from Ryder, and they've issued a statement saying that the company is aware of the incident involving the rental van striking pedestrians in Toronto in the early afternoon, and they're saddened by the tragic event. Deepest sympathies go out to those who were impacted, but they also say that they are looking at this incident very seriously and also cooperating fully with authorities. And so that is what we're hearing again from Ryder, the rental company. We've seen these sorts of scenarios unfold before, but at this stage, we do not know what the motivation was, what the scenario was, and a police investigation continues.
Yeah, you know, what's potentially significant of the arrest video we saw, the very brief bit of video that we got on social media, is that it appears that the driver was arrested and in relatively good health, right? So you'd think that that gives the opportunity of police to talk to him and try to get information. Is he answering those questions? We don't know, but that is at least, you know, a hopeful sign in terms of the investigation moving on. Some of you may have heard, and so I'll just mention a statement from the NYPD that they're monitoring the situation in Toronto through their intelligence bureau, and they have deployed additional counterterrorism officers. What do you read into that? Well, you'd think that New York would be very careful on a state of alert all the time for the potential of terrorism, but does their action mean this was terrorism? Of course, not necessarily, although you'd think that New York Police Department would be in touch with the Toronto Police Service. So if there were things at this point that clearly ruled out a bad motive to all of this, you'd think by now they would have known that. You'd think by now Ralph Goodale would have known that. But in terms of what the actual motive is, we certainly have been given absolutely no indication by anyone here as to what the motive for this van collision is. But perhaps when the Toronto Police Service talks, which should be any moment now, we may get some clarity on that. Andy Gibb lives just across the street from where this collision happens, and he joins us now. And begin, Andy, if you could, with a description of what you saw.
I work from home, and I work at my computer, and it was around lunchtime, and I heard a banging outside. It sounded like, you know, a car crash, and I heard a bunch of people screaming and yelling, and I jumped up from my computer and ran out to my balcony, and I could see things happening below me. My balcony overlooks Mel-Lastman Square, so I could see people laying on the ground, people scrambling to help them, and I just saw the tail end of the van driving south down the street on Yonge Street on the sidewalk.
And describe for us the van in terms of, did it seem to be was it being driven erratically? Was it speeding off? How would you describe that?
It was, by the time I saw it, it wasn't going very fast, and it sounded like he was braking and, squawking the tires, and it was very erratic. He wasn't going too fast at that point. And I actually saw him drive down one of the little streets that goes in front of a condo building, and that's when I lost sight of it.
What a shocking thing for you, one moment just to be relaxing and working, and the next moment to all of a sudden see a scene like that without being graphic, and I'm sure you don't want to be graphic, but just generally speaking, in terms of the people who were hit, of the aftermath of the collision, what did you see?
Well, I saw 5 or 6 people on the ground from Empress, the intersection at Empress all the way through to Mel Aspin Square, and I can still, right now, I'm still seeing 3 bodies laying on the sidewalk that haven't been taken away by the coroner yet. They're covered up, still laying there.
Still laying there now?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think at some point you went down to street level, right?
Yeah, half an hour ago I went down and just walked around a bit, but you can't get too far. I mean, all the streets are taped off. There's yellow police tape all the way up to Finch from where I am.
So where you are, though, is inside, I guess, the cordon created by the yellow police tape. So you're already inside there. So when you got out on street level, were you able to walk around, or what was the situation?
Yeah, you can still walk up and down the sidewalks. You just can't walk onto the street.
And besides the disturbing scene that you described in terms of the people who were still there, what else is happening there? I presume investigators. Is the street otherwise empty? Other people like you just walking around? Tell us about that.
Yeah, there's a few people walking around now. The streets are fairly bare. There's about 30, cop cars, EMS vehicles. There's still a lot of emergency vehicles out front here on the street.
And you get a sense of, on the one hand, obviously the aftermath of a terrible incident like this would, lead to a lot of emergency workers being there. But beyond that, do you get a sense of a high level of security or a high level of alert on that street right now?
Yeah, I'd say so. But there are, police walking around right now. It's all pretty casual. People are just walking around with clipboards and, just looking at things, and people on the pedestrians standing on the side just still kind of looking on.
How are you doing?
Well, I'm okay. I mean, I was shaken up earlier on, but it's wearing off a little bit now, but it was, I've seen car accidents at the corner here before, but this was a little different than that, and you could tell right away that it was different than just a car accident.
And so when you got on the street, are you basically free to go where you want? Like if you need to leave the neighborhood, you're okay?
Yeah. You can get off. You can go up and down the side streets and anywhere off of Yonge, you can still keep going.
And just to get back to that original moment, and I know you don't know the motive, and I'm not asking you what the motive is. How would you possibly be able to answer that? But I'm more curious about the moment when you were sitting there and you heard what you heard. Just describe for us again kind of what your first impressions were and what happened next.
Well, for me, when I first jumped up and went outside, I thought it was just going to be a car accident. Maybe somehow someone got up onto the sidewalk and, lost control of the vehicle. That's happened before at the corner here a couple years ago. But then when I looked outside, and you could still see the van going down the street, a block further south. Usually an accident would have come to a stop by then. It still wouldn't be moving, and he was still moving. So, and now it turns out that this was halfway through his ride down the street. This started all the way up at Finch. So it was way more than just an accident.
And again, without being graphic at all, I assume people who happen to be there start helping those who need help. And I mean, was that happening? And then, oh, you know what? I think that we're going to be getting our update here pretty soon from the Mayor, John Tory. Let's go live to him now. Sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, thanks.
Well, may I begin by expressing on behalf of all of the people of Toronto and on behalf of myself and the members of Toronto City Council our profound condolences to those who have fallen victim to this terrible act this afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Our hearts and our thoughts and our prayers go out to the families of those involved and to their friends and co-workers. We obviously don't have a lot of detail we can provide as yet, but we know there were casualties, and our hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to the families and friends of those people. In times like this, we rely on our first responders to do the job that they're there to do for us, and I can assure you, having been at a briefing that we've just completed in the last while, that we are very well served and were from the first moment that this became known to the authorities, and that I want to assure people that the city is in safe hands at the moment and that they're continuing with their investigation, and the Deputy Chief will have more to say about that in just a moment. I also want to say that this is a time when this community should come together. These are not the kinds of things that we expect to happen in this city. We hope they don't happen anywhere in the world, but we especially don't expect them to happen in Toronto. But things are as they are, and beyond supporting our first responders as they continue to do their work, and you'll hear more about the task that lies in front of them investigating this terrible tragedy, I hope that we will as a city remind ourselves of the fact that we are admired around the world for being inclusive and for being accepting and understanding and considerate, and that we are united in standing in solidarity, especially with those who have fallen victim to this terrible tragedy today. Now, I have some very practical matters, and I just want to look at my notes to make sure that I don't forget any of these, but I want to convey a number of things to the people of the City of Toronto, especially people in this area. First of all, we're asking people who live here or who work here, please do not come to this area if you're not already here. The police and the other first responders have a lot of work to do on a very complicated investigation, and it just helps with the task they have in front of them if people are not in this area. Secondly, we've asked, and we are asking, that all of the businesses and buildings that are office buildings where people work during the day, that those people would, in an orderly fashion, close those businesses for the remainder of the day and ask people to go home. It is close to the end of the business day for many people in any event, but we're asking if people will close their businesses, and we're asking for those businesses that are on the east side of Yonge Street that they use Doris Avenue for those who are trying to leave by car or on foot, and for those on the west side that they use Beecroft. In other words, we're trying to keep people off Yonge Street near the scene of this tragedy so that the police can continue with their investigation, and so that there's as little chance of any kind of disturbance of the scene of this incident as possible. So we're asking that to be the case. I have already asked that the city government building at Mel Lastman Square be closed for the day, and I think again it was close to the closing time, and so again I'm hoping those people are leaving that building in an orderly fashion. We're asking that people who are coming home to this area please do the same thing. If they can use Beecroft to the west of Yonge Street to get to where they're going, and if they can use Doris to the east, that would be very helpful. We have Toronto Police Service officers, and we have as well people from our Transportation Services Department here to help with the traffic flow so that people can get to where they're going. But obviously people do have to come home, but again, if they don't have to come home for any reason, then again it's going to be easier if they don't come tonight, or if they come at a later hour so that not everybody is coming here at one time. With respect to public transportation, as people will know, we have had the subway closed at the North York Centre station today, but the trains have been passing through. Passengers are asked to get off at Shepherd, and the trains then go through on to Finch, and people are not able to get on or off at North York Centre, and in fact the trains are empty traveling between those two stops going northbound. We're asking people to take that into account in their travel plans, if possible, to use the York University, Spadina University subway line, or to use other means, because obviously it will be more complicated than normal because we can't offer shuttle buses on the section of Yonge Street that is closed and would be expected to remain closed for some period of time. I would say to people that I've been advised in the briefings that I've been privy to this afternoon that it is likely there will be several days of disruption going on because there's a major investigation, obviously, that's going to be taking place here. And I hope that people will be considerate of that and understand that there likely will be disruptions to traffic and to business and to other things in this area of the city. But as part of, I'm sure, pulling together, we will understand that the sacrifices people have to make in that regard would be reasonable in the context of something as terrible as this that has happened and that we have to get to the bottom of as quickly and efficiently as possible. Finally, I would say that we are in the process of establishing two hotlines, two response lines for people. The first and most important is for the families of those who are worried about loved ones and are trying to inquire about the well-being of their loved ones. And I don't have the number at this very moment, but they're in the process of being established as we speak, and we'll have that information for people very shortly. And the second one is one that will be established separately, which is for people who can help the police in any way. If people have any information whatsoever about this terrible incident, we're asking that they should contact the police through this number that we will make available to you at the same time as we make the one available for the families and loved ones of those who may have been affected or those who are concerned about that. And so in introducing Deputy Peter Ewan, may I just say once again that it is a time to be as calm as we can be in the city, to understand that our first responders are doing their job, especially our police. I can tell you how incredibly impressed I was at the professionalism and the thoroughness of the people that I saw in action in the room that we've just come from. And I hope people won't forget that spirit of unity and that spirit of solidarity and that sense of calm that we should have as people go about dealing with an awful tragedy. But nonetheless, they'll be dealing with it, I'm sure, very effectively. And on that note, I would ask Deputy Ewan to brief you from his end. And we will not take any questions today because it's just at a stage where it's too early to start into the kinds of things I'm sure you'd want to know about. Deputy?
Good afternoon. My name is Acting Chief Peter Ewan. I'm here to relate some information to you as to what happened today on Yonge Street. Approximately 1:30 this afternoon, Toronto Police received a number of calls from citizens indicating a vehicle was driving on Yonge Street and striking a number of pedestrians between Finch Avenue and Shepherd Avenue. At this time, what is known to us is we have located that vehicle. The driver is in custody right now, and he's been investigated to the events that took place this afternoon. I also want to offer my condolences to the families and the victims of this tragic event that took place. We can confirm for you tonight, right now, we have 9 people that are dead, 16 that are injured. Toronto Police Service has mobilized all available resources, and I can assure the public all our available resources have been brought in to address this tragic situation and to investigate this situation. And I also want to assure the public, the rest of the city, are adequately policed by our other resources. As the mayor said earlier, we will be establishing 2 hotlines. One is for victims and families to call for the loved ones. The other one is for, more importantly, for witnesses to call in, because this is going to be a complex investigation. Toronto Police Service will be here for a number of days to shut down a busy stretch of Toronto, but this what is required, because this is going to be a long investigation with multiple witnesses, with a lot of surveillance cameras, and namely at 1:30 this afternoon there were a lot of pedestrians out enjoying, a lot of witnesses enjoying the sunny afternoon. So we're urging anyone that saw anything, please call Crime Stoppers or call Toronto Police Service and let us know. Those 2 hotlines numbers will be published very shortly on our website, through our social media, our Twitter. So please stay tuned. The chief is on his way back to Toronto. He will be addressing the media later on tonight. So there will be more information to follow later on tonight. At this stage, I ask the City of Toronto pray for our victims and also to assist the Toronto Police Service in bringing this matter to a successful conclusion. As I stated earlier, we have 1 person in custody and the investigation is ongoing. That's all I'm prepared to say right now. Thank you.
Deputy Chief, how was the suspect arrested without gunfire? Okay, that's the latest.
So we're watching live as the Deputy Chief of the Toronto Police Service just speaking. We knew that there were going to be casualties here. We had heard from somebody who lived in the area that there were still 3 bodies covered by tarps in the neighborhood, but I don't know if many expected to hear that 9 people have been killed in this van collision with pedestrians in North Toronto, 16 people injured. And we heard from the mayor, John Tory, just before that, saying that people in Toronto must be as calm as we can possibly be. But also a lot of references by both the mayor and the deputy chief of police. By the way, the chief of police we heard will be speaking later tonight is on his way back to the city. But we heard from both the deputy chief and the mayor that there is a major investigation going on, that they'll be talking to the many witnesses that would have seen this van, that they'll be looking at surveillance video. They have the driver in custody. That suggests, I suppose, that they're curious about maybe who this driver was in contact with and clearly what happened before that moment of collision. And the mayor had arrived at that live briefing, I guess. It's not a news conference, really. They weren't answering any questions, but he did arrive there after having been briefed. So it is interesting to note what he didn't say. That they did not speak at all about motive, that they didn't speak at all about the possibility, as far as I can remember, of accomplices. They did say that there's a major investigation, and you may remember that at one point the mayor made reference to how inclusive a city Toronto is, and Arthi Pohl, who's sitting here in the studio with me, both she and I kind of looked at each other at that point, because you wonder if that's not a coded reference to say, look, you know, no matter what this investigation uncovers, it's important in a city that that people understand this is a city that is renowned for, proud of having so many people from so many parts of the world and so many cultures here in a city living, as you hear people say all the time who visit Toronto, live in a peaceful, orderly city. But it certainly wasn't peaceful and orderly at around 1:30 this afternoon Eastern time when this van plowed into pedestrians. We now know 9 people killed, 16 others injured. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he's been watching the situation in Toronto, and he was asked to comment on his way into question period. So this was a little earlier on this afternoon.
Obviously, we're just learning about the situation in Toronto. Our hearts go to anyone affected. We're going to obviously have more to learn and more to say in the coming hours.
And again, just to underscore that, was the Prime Minister speaking before, for example, the time that Mayor John Tory would have received his briefing, and presumably at that point Justin Trudeau also not having a lot of the details there. Rosemary Barton has been following the story along with me. She's in our Ottawa bureau. Rosemary?
Yeah, Ian, I would imagine the Prime Minister right now is getting briefed as to what is known and not known by his national security advisors and other people. There's a cabinet meeting scheduled for tomorrow. I wonder whether or not they are going to have to maybe have some sort of meeting this evening, even though Ralph Goodale remains in Toronto. This is, I think it's worth reminding people, these van attacks, not the first in the world, but certainly the first that we've seen of this nature in Canada. We've seen this happen in Nice on Bastille Day back in 2016. I think both you and I were on the air that day. More than 80 people killed. It has happened in Germany. It has happened in multiple countries. These attacks on what people call soft targets. It's just a van driving down a street. And while we don't know the motivation here, it would seem as though the action is very similar in nature. And certainly cities in Ottawa, and I know it's happened again also in Toronto, have tried to find ways to secure areas, right? Interesting to me that both the mayor and the police deputy chief talked about how warm it is in Toronto. So there probably were more people out on the street walking around than there would have been, say, even a week ago. Some of the things that we have done in this country, particularly in the nation's capital, is put up big cement boulders, blockers, barriers, so that when there is an event, like Canada Day, for instance, vehicles don't have access to the streets. They've also used snow plows, those kinds of things. But this was any other day, any other street. And of course, these kinds of things can't be predicted. the Minister of Public Safety, who again, very coincidentally, is meeting with his counterparts in Toronto, his G7 counterparts, as are foreign ministers. So many ministers who would have seen these kinds of events in their own countries, coincidentally meeting today, told reporters not so long ago, Ian, that the threat level has not changed. That threat level was brought up to medium back in October of 2014 when this town was attacked by a lone gunman, and it hasn't changed since. It is at medium, which essentially means that it's possible an attack could take place, but not likely. So it will be interesting to see whether there was any chatter, any clues about this kind of thing taking place. I think also we should expect to hear more from the federal government in the hours ahead. This was an initial briefing from the Toronto Police, who remain, as you've been talking about, the lead agency for now on the investigation, but certainly in the hours ahead, given the number of dead, I would imagine we will hear more from the federal government.
And Rosemary, of those injured at Sunnybrook Hospital, they're saying now that 5 of those people are in critical condition, that 2 are in serious condition, and they will be speaking publicly about their role in all of this fairly soon this afternoon. You know, we're being, of course, very careful and making sure that all the information that we pass on to those of you who are watching at home has been carefully vetted and thought about. And so as we talk about the possibility of this, Rosemary, being a terror attack of the parallels to Nice, for example, you know, we do that with caution, but at the same time, I would think at this point in the afternoon, if the preliminary briefings that Ralph Goodale got, that Mayor John Tory got, that the police are getting from their investigation, if the preliminary indications were that this was definitely not a bad motive here, that this was not an attack, that this was not terrorism, that point would be made more clearly. They certainly haven't conclusively come out and said what the motive is, but they certainly seem to be cautiously leaving the door open to that possibility.
I would agree 100% with you. Sometimes it's what is not said here that matters. The fact that no one is suggesting this was an accident leads me as well to believe that there was perhaps some sort of intent here. And certainly from all we've been hearing, Ian, from witnesses, it does sound as though there was an attempt by this vehicle to hit people who were on the sidewalks. And we've seen bodies covered by tarps. We've seen and heard from people who were able to move out of the way in time. And again, you're quite right. We're not going to call this something that it isn't yet until authorities tell us that that's what they have determined. But it would seem to at least remind us of past incidents, particularly in Europe. And it would seem by what authorities are not saying that certainly points to a real possibility here.
And the other thing is, and we're going to hear from terror experts and security experts, I'm sure, through the evening and tonight on the National, that as you pointed out, Rosemary, one of the things about these kinds of attacks is that they are unfortunately easy to do and deadly in their effect. But that also means that anybody can do them, right? And so, and that person can then say what he or she wants to say about the motive. And so let's say for a moment that person says, my motive is I did this in sympathy with this group or this person. That isn't necessarily because they're connected to that group or that person. And so it's not hard to imagine that one of the things that police would be involved in now, I suppose, is saying, okay, this is what the early indications are. Seems like it's a bad motive. Seems like it's not an accident. Maybe even there's something that the driver has said that leads to a motive, but we need to do more checking here before we can even feel comfortable on that, before we make a conclusion.
Yeah, and I think that is why you are seeing this sort of caution from authorities. Sometimes it is very clear and very obvious, and other times it is not. Again, though, important to remind people that the fact that the man who was driving this van is in custody, was not shot by police. In fact, we've seen that tape on various social media channels of him being arrested by police without being shot, which was fairly remarkable given that police didn't know who they were encountering or if he had weapons on him. The fact that he has been taken into custody will certainly help investigators very quickly determine what this was about, or at least what his intent was. And as we've heard from various witnesses over the past number of hours too, Ian, they have also been talking to police. So there were lots of people who saw what happened, and certainly the suspect as well will be able to help them determine quickly whether this is something certainly more nefarious, and also whether Canada writ large maybe needs to think about its threat level. Although for now, as I said, the public safety minister says that that is not in question, that it will remain where it is.
All right, Rosemary Barton live in Ottawa, and you'll help us with our coverage on this story throughout the evening and on the national as well. So thank you very much. Let's bring in Arthi Pohl. Arthi, we have less than a minute, but what are you looking at?
All right, so I just want to bring us up to speed on some of the information we have. From example, Sunnybrook Hospital, they have updated the number of patients that they received. They say that 5 are in critical condition, 2 are in serious condition, 1 is in fair condition. A total of 10 people were brought to Sunnybrook Hospital, and they say 2 patients arrived VSA, which means vital signs absent. So that is the latest information that we have from Sunnybrook Hospital. We also want to make mention that the officials are going to publicize 2 hotlines that have been set up. The mayor mentioned one will be for victims, relatives of victims, trying to get in touch with people or get the conditions of their loved ones. And the second hotline will be for police looking for tips. So those are 2 points that we just want to continue to mention as we keep tracking the story in.
All right, well, really nice having you in the studio here with me. You're going to stay here. We're going to continue to go through this information. We are waiting for more details on this story as our live coverage continues on CBC News Network. Well, good evening. Here's a live look we're going to show you in just a moment of Toronto. We are following breaking news of a van that struck pedestrians in North Toronto. And we now know that the magnitude of that attack, we had heard the possibility that some people had died, but now we know that there are 9 dead, 16 injured. And as Arthi Pohl mentioned to those of you who are watching just a few minutes ago, Sunnybrook Hospital saying that they had 10 patients that were sent to the trauma center there, 2 pronounced dead on arrival, 5 in critical condition, 2 are in serious condition, and 1 is in fair condition. This was a day in Toronto that, we were all hoping would turn out so differently. A beautiful day outside, sunny and warm after what has been a long stretch of really tough spring weather. There's a hockey game in this city tonight. The Toronto Maple Leafs are playing the Boston Bruins, and was a tremendous amount of excitement about that game. But then all of a sudden at 1:30 this afternoon, we started hearing reports of a van that had jumped on a sidewalk, that pedestrians had been hit, scattered about. And then you start wondering what possibly could have been the problem there. Was it just an accident? Was it a medical emergency? Was it something more sinister? And at this point, though, we don't know the motive. We have heard from the mayor, John Tory, and the deputy chief of the Toronto Police Service suggesting that the motive was not a good one, that the person who was driving that van, although they never said this in so many words, but as you carefully parse the words they did say, it certainly did seem to suggest that that driver was in fact intending to hit people on the sidewalk. Is that indeed the case? And if so, why? There is a major investigation going on. The Toronto Police Service saying they have many witnesses that they need to talk to, surveillance cameras to look at, and we do know the driver is in custody. The video we saw of the driver being arrested suggested that he was in good health as he was taken into custody, and perhaps that bodes well for the investigation if in fact he is talking to investigators. So we have extensive coverage of this story, which is very much in the stage of developing. We have reporters on scene, including Jacqueline Hansen, and let's go to her now. Jacqueline?
Hi, Ian. Yes, so I am standing just off of Yonge Street right now. So Finch is just to my right, just north here, and south would be Shepherd. So it's this entire section of the street that is blocked off. And for those people who don't know Toronto, who don't know Yonge Street, it is a very, very busy street. Typically, right now it is busy, but with some other activity. Just behind me, there are police. There was an orange covering on the ground, and they're attending to that covering right now. We're not showing that in the frame, but they've been quite busy. They've been walking up and down the street here, marking orange chalk along the sidewalk here. So again, trying to understand this series of events that happened. Witnesses saying, as you've heard described, that this white van came up onto the curb, came up onto the sidewalk where it hit pedestrians along along the way. So police trying to investigate here and trying to figure out what exactly happened.
And you've been talking to people, obviously, in that area, some of whom saw the collision, some who saw the aftermath. What have they been saying to you?
Yeah, there have been quite a few people just coming up to this police tape here and trying to take a look at what it was going on, and some of them emotional, and it being, you know, hours after this incident happened. But we did speak with a witness who saw the driver of the truck, or pardon me, of the van and driving the van. And so the witness described him as looking very angry, so that from that witness's perspective, he could really read a lot of emotion from that man's eyes, he described, and saying that he looked angry, he looked distraught as he was driving. Again, this is one witness's account, but as you've been speaking with people, there are a lot of people in this area. It's a very busy area, so as you mentioned, police have a lot of witnesses to speak with in order to get an idea of all that happened here today.
Okay, Jacqueline Hansen, live near the scene of the collision. Thank you very much. And we are live here on CBC News Network, and I understand we have a guest on the phone right now, Young Lee, whose law office overlooks the scene. And Mr. Lee, describe for us what you heard and what you saw.
Well, it was just a regular Monday at our office, and about 1:30 this afternoon, it was about the time that some of the staff would be going for lunch, and we noticed outside our window, which overlooks the right into across the street into Mount Lashman Square, and we noticed that there was some emergency going on, and we noticed at first that there was one person down. Being attended to next to the food truck that was out there. It was a beautiful, bright, sunny day, and it was one of the first days that I noticed that there was a food truck there. And but then when we looked around the square, we saw that there was a crowd of other people and building up, and there was at the far southeast corner of Mount Lashman Square, there were also two other people down on the sidewalk, and they were frantically being with emergency persons attending to doing CPR and trying to provide medical services there.
I mean, just a scene that hopefully none of us watching, listening, are going to have to endure. I mean, tell us what the next few moments were like there.
Well, it was surreal to look at that and see this crowd developing slowly. At first, there wasn't actually a lot of emergency vehicles, but then there was you could start to hear the sirens coming through the thick plate glass to be able to hear the sirens of the emergency vehicles, and also more and more emergency vehicles arrived, and more emergency personnel arrived, more firemen, more police. Eventually, there were even tactical police on the street with semi-automatic weapons and long rifles, and they brought out the yellow tape to cordon off the properties areas around Mount Lashman Square.
So we're watching various video while you're talking to us on the phone. The video we're watching right now, I think, is video that you took. We see the square in the background, and you know, I'm looking at my television screen now, and I think one of the things that's interesting about these pictures is how spread out the victims of this seem to be, and the sidewalk basically more or less empty, except where people are attending to those who are down on the sidewalk. Did you eventually get down to street level at some point?
No, I didn't get down to street level, but some of my staff did go down to the ground, and actually before there was the yellow tape out and more police officers there, they actually went over to the west side of Yonge Street to be closer to to figure out actually what happened. We thought it was just an isolated incident in Mount Lashman Square or something, and it was just they just came back described it was just bloody awful. There were these people were just frankly in a very bad shape. There was blood. People's shoes were literally knocked off their feet and onto the streets and so forth. And you know, the medical professionals were just acting frantically, trying to save some of the people. And it was just, they came back to the office feeling sick.
Yeah, well, not hard to imagine why. And I assume that office, you're probably not going to be open for business tomorrow.
No, I don't know. They've cordoned off the both on Yonge Street, both north and southbound. There's been
you know what,
with,
Mr. Lee, I'm just going to jump in and interrupt you. Sorry about that, but
sure.
We have a news conference going on now, Sunnybrook Hospital, and I'd like to take that now if we can.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Emergency medical services, police services, and the many teams in our hospital who have responded to the situation.
Doctor, are any of the victims or any of the people you're treating for children?
The victims that we have here are adults.
What can you tell us about the two people who succumbed to their injuries?
I don't have details about any of the injuries, either in the two individuals who were pronounced deceased or in the ones who are still receiving care at this time.
But they've been positively identified and their family has been identified, the two victims who were deceased.
Still in a process of identification and confirming identification. As I mentioned, if family members believe that they may have someone who's been impacted by this, there's a telephone number which I can read again at the end of the statement to contact if they wish further information on how they can proceed here to assist further.
Is the suspect one of those being treated inside? Is anyone in there in custody?
Not that I'm aware of.
Doctor, the hospital takes in about 1,000 trauma patients a year. You've had 10 today?
That's correct. So the 10 individuals who came in all came in as trauma patients with varying levels of injury.
Have you ever seen anything quite like this? This is a situation been described by an EMS supervisor, by police in the city as unprecedented.
The circumstances certainly are unprecedented, and I think it's a situation that we all prepare for. As a regional trauma center, we practice, we drill for code orange procedures, and our teams were prepared. And I think they acted in an incredibly coordinated fashion to provide care to the people that were brought to us today.
What does code orange mean?
Code orange is a situation where there's an external disaster or incident, where there's a number of individuals who are arriving at the hospital beyond the normal numbers, where we have to mobilize additional resources to manage the patients that are coming in.
When was the last time you would have had a code orange? What would it be? I mean, this is almost unprecedented disaster.
I'm not certain the last time Sunnybrook had a code orange. They do occur from time to time, and we sometimes prepare for an incident that fortunately in those circumstances it doesn't turn out to be as serious as this one today. But fortunately our teams were prepared and were able to act today.
Dr. Hess, you said in the statement, you said 3 people were in serious condition. However, in the statement that we have here, it says 2 in serious condition, 1 in fair. Can you just clarify?
That's correct. The one individual in fair condition has been upgraded to serious.
How many people have gone into surgery at this hour? How many patients have gone into surgery?
I don't have the numbers of who has gone to surgery and who has not at this point.
So can you give us an idea of age range of some of the people that you're treating?
I don't have ages right now. Some are not yet identified. I don't have ages.
Sir,
the person in fair condition was upgraded to serious. That's correct.
The individual who was in fair condition initially was since upgraded to serious.
Can you give us any more detail about exactly how serious those are? Are they life-threatening? Are you worried about
So certainly it's early in the process of their care. We want to make sure that we're able to assess all of their injuries before we make any sort of more definitive statement. But at this point, there's 5 that are most seriously injured that are classified as critical. That's 3 that are serious.
Doctor, the 5 that are in critical condition, I mean, what we've heard from witnesses is this is a van that literally drove through people. Can you discuss the nature of some of these serious injuries, please?
Well, I wasn't one of the care providers, so I couldn't speak to their injuries per se. But certainly there was a range of injuries, including some very serious injuries.
How many doctors and nurses
would have been? Families yet?
We're in the process of connecting with families. I know some have arrived and we've connected with. There's others that we have not yet.
What can you say about your conversations with them?
I've not been involved in the conversations with any of the families, so I couldn't really speak to that.
Can you speak to the mobilization of staff that you would have had to enable in a COVID?
Sure. So we got an initial pre-alert call shortly after this happened that there was a potential that we would be getting multiple patients. We activated our Code Orange response at that time, which is a system-wide response throughout the hospital. It involves teams, everyone from those working in the labs and blood bank to prepare our teams both in the emergency department and the ICU and the OR, but also on our floors to try to create space for patients that are coming in.
How many doctors and staff do you have working on this right now, and have you had to call people in?
We have called in some additional critical care nurses to help manage the patients in the ICU area afterwards. The teams, we were fortunate in a way in the timing that this happened. This was during the middle of the day, and we had a large number of our staff and physicians that were already here, so we were able to manage the initial arrival of people in that way.
Doctor, 10 victims, patients I should say, from the scene arrived here in hospital. I know the conditions vary. Do they all arrive by emergency?
I believe they all came by EMS, yes.
And I know you can't say much about the two people who are deceased as you work to notify their families. Can you give us any indication as to age, gender?
I can't at this time.
Doctor, I know previously when the initial numbers came out, that were between 7 individuals. It also mentioned that the hospital is in the zone kind of lockdown and some abundance of precaution. Is that still in effect?
I believe the lockdown is still in effect. I would have to confirm that. Certainly, the numbers change over time, as you can imagine in a situation like this. It's a very fluid situation. So when we initially were aware that there were 7, there were others that arrived subsequently, and as you can imagine, it's a little bit of organized chaos when situations like this happen. So it takes a while to be certain of the numbers, and we wanted to make sure that we had an accurate account before we went out.
But is the hospital still in lockdown?
I don't believe so. We still are for the time being.
And what does that mean?
It's just preventing anyone from accessing the hospital, the emergency department that doesn't absolutely need to. It's also a means so that if families were to come to the emergency department, we're able to redirect them to our family information center and to try to connect them, get information about the loved one that they're seeking.
So, Doctor, just to clarify, all the people that have come through this emergency ward this afternoon were people, those 10 people from the Yonge and Finch.
That's my understanding. No, there are other individuals who have accessed the emergency department. So we're not turning away patients that are arriving, but for visitors instead of coming to the emergency department.
And we know that access to the campus in general was being controlled. Was that a request by police, and is that part of your protocol?
I don't know in this circumstance who initiated the decision to lock down. Obviously, it's a circumstance where there was a lot of uncertainty initially in terms of exactly what had happened and what risk might be present. So there was an abundance of caution to try and keep our patients and our staff safe.
To be clear, just the emergency department, are we also talking about other areas of the hospital that are also under this lockdown?
It's been the emergency department that has been. Thank you. Thank you.
And that was a live update from Sunnybrook Hospital. We apologize for the audio quality. We were straining to hear it, so I'm sure you were as well, but we felt that it was important to stay with that live, to hear the information. We heard that the hospital is likely still in lockdown. It was in lockdown shortly after people started coming in, and as a precaution, because who at that point knew what the motive was. At this point, we haven't heard what the motive was, but it seemed to be an act of malice of some sort. And so to be cautious, the Sunnybrook Hospital decided to increase their security. We do know, of course, as you've seen on your screen, 9 people have been killed in this van collision. 16 are injured, and of those injured, 8 of those are in Sunnybrook, 5 in critical condition, the highest level of seriousness, 2 in the next level, which is serious condition, and 1 in fair condition. We are live here on CBC News Network as we continue to follow this developing story. And about an hour ago, maybe a little bit more, we heard from the Mayor of Toronto, John Tory, and the Deputy Chief of Police. We will hear from the Police Chief when he returns to Toronto this evening, but Arthi Pole is in the studio here with me. And really the most information we've received on this, and it was a limited amount of information, and some of the references were very carefully, almost in a coded form, but we at least did get an update from the mayor and the police service.
Yeah, now neither of them did take any questions, so we couldn't ask them for more details into anything, but they certainly, of course, gave us the number of dead and the number of injured. There were some, I guess, interesting comments, as you're sort of referring to, from Mayor John Tory. He said, "We are admired around the world for being accepting," so certainly pointing to, no matter what comes of this investigation, remember the values that he's trying to suggest that this city abides by, and we know that it is a very diverse city. We also know that the city government building at Mel Lastman Square is to be shut down. That is according to the mayor, also indicating that, as we talked about, 2 hotlines are going to be set up. One is for people who fear that perhaps their loved ones may have been injured or perhaps killed in this van incident earlier today in Toronto, that they can call that number. And then a second hotline is going to be set up for police to get in touch with witnesses. And again, we heard the mayor urging anyone who was at the scene at the time to give a call to police, to the hotline, in order for them to continue with this investigation. We also heard from the deputy police chief that certainly this investigation is going to be extensive. That is underway right now into the suspect who was behind the wheel of that van, who was detained and was arrested. We have heard also, as we've mentioned, that the New York Police Department's counterterrorism unit is monitoring this situation, but at this stage they say there's no known nexus to the city. But of course we know that any major city would be on high alert. We have seen van attacks. We did not hear from officials that this was an attack, but certainly given the fact that we've seen them in the recent past in Spain, in France, in Europe, in Germany, people would be on edge. We do also have some video to share with our viewers of what appears to be the arrest of the suspect, and we can show that to our viewers now. This again appears to show, we do not know if the suspect was armed or not, but you see the white Ryder van there.
And that's another interesting thing, right? That this was a rental van. We've seen this, just thinking off the top of my head, at least in one of the van attacks in Europe, if not more than one. And renting a vehicle does leave more of an electronic and credit footprint, obviously, whatever documents you need to rent it. But at the same time, it just makes it so easy for anybody, really, to, if you're going to use a van as a weapon, and if all you have to do is to be able to rent that van, it makes it awfully easy. But, Arthi, we were talking about this earlier. When we look at this arrest, and, it does suggest that the suspect, the driver of this van, the alleged driver of this van, is in custody, is able to speak if indeed he chooses to speak, and perhaps is helping in the investigation. So, was this an attack? Was the motive here a bad motive? Well, certainly the Minister of Public Safety, Ralph Goodale, the Mayor of Toronto, the Deputy Chief of the Toronto Police Service, all of them could have said that wasn't the case if they didn't think it was the case. If they felt this was just an accident, just a health problem, there were many opportunities for them to say it, and I think notably they haven't.
Yeah, and we should also just point out that Ralph Goodale, the Public Safety Minister, when he was speaking, he did say that Canada's threat level is unchanged, and at this stage it was very clear that there's nothing to suggest that this was terror related, but it's very early in the investigation.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, I'd have to look through the notes. You and I are both watching here live. I'm not sure. When he said that he didn't think that, that there was nothing to suggest that the threat level should be changed, that still could be consistent with one person claiming that they had a motive of terror, which we don't know. And even if you claim you have a motive of terror, it doesn't mean that you're aligned with anybody. It could be one person who has delusions of grandeur in an attack. But you and I were also talking about the fact that off camera, or at least exchanging a look, that when the mayor, John Tory, talked about this is an inclusive city, and then later on when he said it's really important for the city to be calm, to me those seemed like careful references to say, look, no matter what we find out in this investigation, let's not use this as a time for people in Toronto to be torn apart, but rather to remain united. You know, the other thing is, and maybe some people across the country, Arthi, who are watching, may find this almost a trivial point, but it really isn't. There's a hockey game tonight at Air Canada Centre. So that brings to mind a couple of things. First of all, the conflicting emotions in this city. I just know so many people throughout yesterday and today were so happy about this game, so much looking forward to it, a real celebration of the city for so many people. So they're going to have that collision of emotions. But the other thing is you have, I don't know what ACC seats, 19,000 people or so who are heading in there.
And I should make the point also that we do have calls being made right now to the ACC to see whether or not they are making any extra security precautions, given the fact that this will be a big game taking place tonight. There will be a number of road closures. In fact, Toronto Police just tweeted out some new road closures, and that would impact the Rogers Centre. But there are large crowds.
Center, right?
The Air Canada Centre, pardon me. But there are large crowds that gather outside during these games, and we heard there was a lot of panic and chaos.
Right. I forgot about that. Like, not only do you have the 19,000 people inside the ring, but I saw outside. The pictures in the last game.
It's a beautiful day. This is exactly probably part of the reason there were so many casualties outside. If it was cold, not as many people would be outside, but that does attract a lot of people, so it'll be interesting to see if that impacts what happens tonight in that respect.
And the other event happening in the city, of course, there are always lots of events in Toronto, but this G7 Ministers Conference, and again, no reason to believe that this incident, attack perhaps, was related to the G7. We just don't know if it was. It certainly happened far away from the G7, but one of the results of the G7 being here is you have the eyes of the world, or at least those countries who are members of the G7 with their senior ministers here. Boris Johnson, for example, the UK foreign minister, tweeted out, maybe about an hour ago, that he was sad to see news of the attack while he was visiting this city, a city known and deservedly so for being tolerant, peaceful, multicultural city.
And, you know, Ian, I just had handed to me a statement here from the Toronto Maple Leafs. We were talking about the fact that this is a large event that will take place in the city later on today. And they, in fact, are saying that in order to ensure the safety of all fans at the games, they do continue to work with security agencies. But they also say that in addition to the safety measures already in place, that Toronto Police Service will be implementing a number of additional safety measures, including road closures surrounding the Air Canada Centre tonight to create a safer environment. So there are some additional precautionary measures that are being taken. We have that confirmed to us. Again, though, we still do have calls also into the Air Canada Centre to see what else might happen.
All right, Arthi, thank you very much. It's not quite 5:30 yet, coming up, though, to 5:30, and so just about 4 hours ago, this attack happened. And as we bring in various people, voices, people with various expertise, let's talk to Olivia Chow, well known to those of you watching in Toronto and beyond, a former city councillor, and she chaired the city's committee that dealt with emergency services, police and fire. And let me begin by asking your reaction to this news.
Whoa, it's shocking, and my heart goes out to the families of those that have passed and those that are injured, critically injured. I can't imagine what they're going through right now. And it's shocking because it's such a beautiful day outside today comparing to last week when the ice storm was on. So everybody was in a very happy mode, and then all of a sudden this happened, and I think collectively just go, you know, just catch your breath. My friend from Spain just WhatsApped me and said, are things okay? So I think people are just really quite concerned. But I think, Ian, in this time, it's important to remember that we do not let fear dictate, and that we should be patient. Let us not speculate on the motive, because sometimes this investigation takes a long time. So let's pray and send good wishes to those, the families, but let us not overly speculate.
Yeah, and we've certainly been careful to with the information we're releasing here, but I think that for civic leaders at a time like this, and we saw Mayor John Tory suddenly thrust in front of the cameras, Ralph Goodale as well, this, and you know a little bit about this, this is a challenging time for politicians where they don't want to stoke the fires of anxiety and division, but at the same time, people do need information in a timely way. I don't know if you managed to see Mayor Tory's comments, but it was interesting to see his tone. It was very measured, very careful, and hinting that there was a bad motive on the part of the driver, but at this point not going any further than that. In your time in city government, and especially dealing with emergency services, you obviously didn't have an attack of this magnitude, but any challenge like this at all?
I was on the police service board when there were riots on Yonge Street. I was a member of parliament when G20 was taking place. There had been international incidents. There's been incidents where collectively we saw the chaos and the disruption and the destruction. But I think I just want to echo what Mayor Tory said. Diversity is the strength of Toronto. And sometimes people's motive, you don't know where it comes from, whether it's psychological or is there ideology or is it hate or whatever it may be, we don't know. And one thing I think what we can do is that if the suspects have any friends and relatives, perhaps there may have more information out there. I think it's important that we cooperate with the emergency service people, Toronto Police, as much as possible and give as much information as possible without jumping to conclusion.
Well, if it is malice and hate that is the motive, that comes in many different forms. We saw that in Moncton in the shootings that killed the RCMP officers. We saw it in the Quebec City Mosque shooting. We've seen it in the attack in Ottawa, and we've seen it unfortunately in Europe as well. Olivia Chow, thank you very much for speaking with us on what is turning into a very difficult night for the city that you have served for so long. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.
We are live here on CBC News Network as we continue to follow this developing story. The Prime Minister, of course, watching the situation in Toronto. He was on his way into question period today. This was perhaps a while before he would have gotten a fulsome briefing on what was going on, but here are the comments that he made.
Obviously, we're just learning about the situation in Toronto. Our hearts go to everyone affected. We're going to obviously have more to learn and more to say in the coming hours. And
All right, that's Justin Trudeau. His Minister of Public Safety, Ralph Goodale, speaking in more detail. He is here for this G7 First Ministers conference that's going on in Toronto. Chrystia Freeland, another cabinet minister, was also there, and here's a little of what they had to say.
We cannot come to any firm conclusions at this stage. The police are conducting, obviously, their thorough investigation to determine exactly what happened and why it happened, the motivations involved. But until they are able to provide us with details that put this completely in a factual context, it would be inappropriate to speculate. I can, though, say that there is complete cooperation and collaboration among all of the relevant police organizations to make sure that all the appropriate resources are made available and that we get the answers that you and the public would want just as rapidly as possible. There is no information available to me at the present time that would indicate a change in the risk level. The appropriate authorities of the Government of Canada, in collaboration with all of their relevant law enforcement partners, are constantly assessing and reassessing the nature of risk in the country from whatever source it may come. If they conclude that a change is appropriate, that that decision is made by the key senior officials within the Government of Canada, but there is no information, and I think it's important to state this, there is no information available to me at the present time that would lead us to conclude that there should be a change in risk level.
So it's interesting, right? Like, he's very definitive on the comment that there was absolutely no information to change the threat level, which is not necessarily the same as saying there is no information that the person who was responsible for driving that van had terror as a motive, or who knows what as a motive. So he was careful about the things that he couldn't be definitive on and definitive on some other things. But I think we've noticed with Ralph Goodale, with Mayor John Tory, with the Toronto Police Service, it was just very careful, measured statements. And Goodale, the minister here for this G7 meeting of ministers, I said first ministers earlier, but of senior ministers of various G7 governments. And I remember walking along Front Street yesterday and forgetting that this meeting was going on and seeing a lot of police cars and so a lot of security in the downtown core. But this collision was quite far away from that. Yes, on Yonge Street, but those of you who know Toronto know that Yonge and Finch is a long ways away from the downtown core of the city. Rosemary Barton has been following this story along with me from our newsroom in Ottawa. Rosemary?
Probably just good to go track back a little bit, Ian, and remind people, you showed that clip of the Prime Minister off the top there. That would have been just as he was heading into question period, police saying that this attack, the van struck pedestrians at around 1:30 p.m. Eastern. So at that point, the Prime Minister and other government officials would have known as little as we did, which was only that there had been some sort of accident involving a van. Now, of course, we know considerably more, particularly that there are 9 people dead and 16 others injured. We also know now that contrary to what the Public Safety Minister said in that clip, he has tweeted perhaps more pointed language, calling this a, quote, horrific attack. Again, being careful not to get into whether this is terrorism or not, but certainly making it clear, to me at least by that language, that this was something that was intentional, which again seems to follow what we have been hearing from witnesses and what we have heard from police. The driver, as you've said, has been arrested. We know that this was a rented van, that it has become the modus operandi for many people in many parts of the world, particularly in Europe, when they take a van, something that looks completely normal on the street, and then start to mow down people on the street or on the sidewalks. Perhaps the biggest instance of this back in 2017 on Bastille Day. 2016 rather, in Nice, where a man mowed down hundreds of people, killing 86 of them. And contrary to what I said earlier, Ian, this has actually happened before in Canada, although unsuccessfully. You might remember back in Edmonton in 2017 of September, a man attempted this with a van and was unsuccessful in killing anyone, but was subsequently charged with attempted murder for injuring at least 4 people. Not charged with terrorism, interestingly, because in this country, to meet that bar of a terrorist attack or a terrorist is actually quite hard to meet. If you look, for instance, at the suspect, the convicted accuser now, convicted killer in Quebec City with the Moss shooting in Quebec City, he was actually charged with many different things, none of them terrorism, because it was easier for the police to prove that he was trying to kill people rather than motivated in some way. Anyway, I'm getting a long way down the path here, and I know we don't want to get too far without knowing more from police at this stage about what the motivation was, but probably worth reminding everyone that this has become an all too common scene in many other parts of the world, and today it struck downtown Toronto as we try to understand more.
And you are choosing your words very carefully, and I appreciate that. And I also appreciate your clarification. I hadn't seen the tweet from Ralph Goodale that he is calling it an attack. I mean, even on that, we were very careful to avoid that word until someone in a position like Ralph Goodale's position defined it that way, although it almost certainly did seem like an attack. So we know it's an attack. We know that 9 people were killed. We know that there are people in critical condition in hospital. We do not know specifically what the motive is. And even then, there may be a difference, there may be a gap between what the driver says his motive is and whether he's involved in any sort of larger organization or plan, or whether this is just one person doing something on his own. So, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of stuff that to talk about. But, you know, you and I, particularly when we were covering stories like this on CBC News Network, stories like the attack in Nice, you know, we talked to security experts who would say you can't secure an entire city. You know, that's one of the reasons why vehicles are such a good, quote unquote, weapon, because you can't put up concrete barriers everywhere. And in this case, you know, you're dealing with an area that was far down Yonge Street, far north of the downtown core. And then it comes down to intelligence, right? And we've seen those situations where, and I'm sure right now, the intelligence services in Canada are, you know, looking into what did they know, if anything, about this person. Was there anything before 1:30 this afternoon Eastern time that would have given an indication that that this person was going to take a van and mow people down? One question I have for you, Rosemary, and I don't necessarily know if we'd know the answer. We'd been looking earlier to see who the lead agency, what the lead agency would be in the investigation. So, and I'm a little surprised that it's still the Toronto Police Service. Should we read much into that, or do we just not know what the significance of that would be?
No, I asked that very question, actually, of a government source who said to me that this is very much par for the course. When an incident like this happens in a city or jurisdiction, it really stays with the local police officers until they can determine, or if they can determine, that national security was at risk here and was a threat. So the moment that we see that flip over will be an indication that there was something more to this than, you know, a random person with a car, because I think right now, you know, we are trying to be careful about what the motivation was, because we don't know and no one has suggested it. I would just tell you that Goodale's office, Minister Goodale's office, has come back to clarify his tweet, just so you can get a sense of how careful everyone is being, saying that the reason he used the word attack was to speak to the scope of the violence and not necessarily qualify it. In other words, that it killed so many and hurt so many people, but not saying that this is why it happened. And that's because in these early hours, you're quite right, RCMP, CSIS, everyone would be sort of working together, and we did hear from that from Minister Goodale, to see if there's anything that they can detect from the person that they now have in custody. Was he on their radar? Was there signs of something on his social media channels? Was there chatter between him and someone else? We have seen in other instances with these kinds of events that someone attributes it to a larger group, a terrorist group. In fact, there's no association whatsoever. Is this a person who was radicalized? Is it just a person who's unstable? These are all the kinds of things that they would be thinking about right now, and trying to share high levels of intelligence with all authorities to get a sense right now of what exactly happened and whether there were any signs that it was going to happen at all. And as you say, just as hard as it is to prevent a van from rolling down a street, it is very hard to prevent one individual from attacking multiple people. And that has also been the challenge for CSIS in the past number of years, as we've seen these kind of lone wolf attacks take place. Unless you have a monitor on someone 24/7, you very rarely can prevent them.
Last thing, Rosemary, any indication at all, any hint at all from the Prime Minister's office as to whether he'll be speaking tonight?
I went back to them just recently again to see if he would be speaking tonight. I have not heard word yet. Again, I would imagine he is getting briefed by various people. There is a cabinet meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. And as soon as I know more, I would expect that someone else from the government will come forward tonight. I should just point out that the Minister of Public Safety is meeting with his peers from the G7 right now. That meeting will continue tonight in spite of events, but I would imagine if there's more to say, he or the Prime Minister will come out and do so.
And of course, that balance they have to strike between, on the one hand, not moving into areas of speculation, but at the same time, obviously people in Canada looking for some guidance here as to what more happened. All right, Rosemary, thank you very much. And of course, you'll stay on this story with me through the evening. The Premier of Ontario also speaking to reporters about this incident a short time ago. Here is Kathleen Wynne.
I've been briefed by the provincial security advisor, and what I want people to know is that all levels of government and police services are working together. So the OPP and the RCMP and the Toronto Police Service, all levels are working together, and the information is flowing among those organizations. This is a situation where whoever has information is sharing it with the different police services. There's no gap there, and I will continue to get updates. And as there is more information, that will be shared by the appropriate level of police service.
Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne. And so authorities, of course, are gathering information, investigators dealing with the suspect in this case, politicians waiting to hear from those investigators. And we too are gathering information. We have reporters on the scene, including the CBC's Jacqueline Hansen, who we have been checking in with throughout this afternoon into the evening, live on what is, in terms of weather, a beautiful day, but it certainly has been affected the mood of many people by this tragic attack that's happened in Toronto. And Jacqueline, describe for those who have not been watching through the afternoon where you are and what you're seeing.
Yeah, so right now I'm standing just next to Yonge Street. So this is the street where we are learning what that van did, driving down Yonge Street from Finch, which is just to my right, which is north, and south to Shepherd. So this is the whole section of this street. It's quite long, and typically it's quite busy. In Toronto's Yonge Street is, it's busy from north to south. It's a very long street, so we are quite north in the city right now. And here behind me, actually, and we're just keeping it out of the frame, but Toronto fire officials are surrounding an area that was covered by an orange tarp. So they're attending to that area currently. There was also a drone that the police services had brought out, and that was just recent. So they just brought that drone out. It appears that they're trying to survey this area in some way, and they have been throughout the past couple of hours walking up and down the street here. Officials have been chalking the street, trying to get an idea of the timeline or the series of events that happened on Yonge Street here where we are, Ian.
And we had heard from somebody that we interviewed maybe about an hour ago saying that at that point he could see 3 people, bodies presumably still under tarps on the street. And I assume that what you're keeping out of frame is a body that's still at the scene.
That's what we understand, Ian, that the orange tarp would be covering a body that we wouldn't want everyone to be able to see. It's not the only one that we could see from this vantage point. There is another just south of here as well.
All right, Jacqueline Hansen, we'll come back to you a little bit later on as we continue to follow this story. We're getting an update from the major hospital not too far away, Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto. We had some audio problems with the live feed when we heard from one of the doctors there, but let's listen to an excerpt of that.
Sunnybrook has received a total of 10 victims from the incident today in the area of Yonge and Finch. Unfortunately, 2 of those patients arrived vital signs absent and have been pronounced dead on arrival. We currently have 5 patients in critical condition and 3 in serious condition. For members of the public who may be concerned that their loved ones were involved in this incident, you may contact our Family Information and Support Center. The telephone number is 416-480-4940. That's again 416-480-4940. Sunnybrook would like to thank the first responders, emergency medical services, police services, and the many teams in our hospital who have responded to this situation. Thank you.
Doctor, are any of the victims or any of the people you're treating right now children?
The victims that we have here are adults.
What can you tell us about the 2 people who succumbed to their injuries?
I don't have details about any of the injuries, either in the 2 individuals who were pronounced deceased or in the ones who are still receiving care at this time.
But they've been positively identified and their family has been notified, the 2 victims who are deceased?
Still in a process of identification and confirming identification. As I mentioned, if family members believe that they may have someone who's been impacted by this, there's a telephone number which I can read again at the end of the statement to contact if they wish further information or how they can proceed here to assist further.
All right, so that was our briefing from Sunnybrook Hospital. Natalie Collada, CBC reporter, was there for that news conference, and you heard what the doctor said in the excerpt we played. What more have you learned there?
Well, you know, Ian, it's still a fluid situation very much in the hospital. As you heard, the doctors are still trying to identify some of the patients that they have here, including the 2 individuals who are deceased. And as they said, this is a fluid situation. Just a few minutes before, some of those conditions of those individuals were different, and they have actually progressed to be more serious. And that's what, of course, Dr. Dan Cass, who was just speaking there, was talking about, the fact that they did receive 10 individuals, all of them adults, that 2 people arrived with what they call vital signs absent, meaning they didn't have any vital signs, and then they were then pronounced dead at hospital. That 5 individuals are in critical condition, and now 3 are in serious condition. So those numbers have been changing, and really what we know about what's going on inside the hospital here is that the emergency department is also in a precautionary lockdown, trying to limit the amount of people coming in, coming out, trying to identify the individuals who are here, some of whom have not been identified, so that what they really need is individuals who are watching at home, perhaps who are listening to this as well, who think, I haven't heard from my family member, perhaps they are one of the ones who may have been hurt in this incident, to call the hospital. So that is sort of the situation here. We've also been talking to people from the emergency services, paramedics who were on the scene, talking about how difficult it was there at the scene and sort of the situation they were going through. We haven't had an opportunity yet to speak to any family members who have people inside. As you can imagine, they are busy inside dealing with that, but that is the situation here at this hospital.
Yeah, and just in case somebody watching, wondering why would we talk to a family member, I know you and our colleagues are going to be very careful, very discreet about that, but it does often surprise me how even in these difficult times some family members do want to reach out and speak out. We've already heard people talk, for example, about how emergency responders at the scene did a remarkable job. In an instant they are thrust into this situation of having to deal with an attack that none of us could imagine happening in Canada, right? Whether it's in Toronto or somewhere else. One question I have for you, Natalie, is so the hospital itself is in lockdown. Outside where you are and around the hospital, do you get the sense of a place that's under sort of high security, or is it sort of more relaxed outside?
There is a relaxed, it isn't, I wouldn't say high security, but the area where we are now, you just saw an ambulance pass behind me. Those are really the only cars that they are letting through here in this area right now. They have blocked off the entranceway into the emergency department for regular vehicles other than emergency vehicles. The department itself is open to patients, still receiving patients. However, we haven't seen people walking in other than hospital staff, paramedics. No one's really allowed in. It is more of a relaxed atmosphere. It isn't, I wouldn't say, a tense atmosphere, but there is a sense of security where they are limiting the mobility of the entire public to this hospital as an abundance of caution is what they said. So, as you mentioned just about talking to family members, it is interesting. Sometimes people want to speak and want to share. Other times they don't, and of course we are always respectful of that. But sometimes we have found in situations like this, it can be healing, and a lot of people find it cathartic. So perhaps we will have an opportunity to speak to someone, perhaps we won't. But that is the situation that we're seeing here. Of course, as you can imagine, loved ones who are dealing with family members inside, they're pressing concern, as it should be, is that. So that is what's happening here.
Okay, Natalie Collada live at Sunnybrook Hospital. Thank you very much. And one of the reasons that I asked Natalie about the level of security outside is that the people at Sunnybrook had said earlier that the lockdown was a precautionary measure that they were taking, which suggested to me that they didn't have any information to suggest that anyone who was inside that hospital was at risk of being attacked again. They were presumably, unfortunately, randomly attacked when they were on that sidewalk. If authorities did have a feeling that there was likely to be some sort of, somebody being targeted, followed up, you would likely see evidence of that around the hospital with much more visible security, which, as we've heard, is not the case. Arthi Pohl has been with me in our CBC News Network and CBC News studios here as we get information coming through. And what do you have for us?
Well, we do have a little bit more information when it comes to victims. And although, as we heard from Natalie, of course, we want to be very cautious. We know one of the steps, of course, officials are taking now is notifying next of kin, those people who have been injured or tragically killed because of this van incident. But we know that there is a statement from Invesco, which is a financial company. And in the statement from Invesco, it says, "Our thoughts and prayers go out to all the victims and their families impacted by today's incident. While I can confirm that 2 Invesco employees were injured, I do not have any additional information at this time." So this Invesco building, I was taking a look on the map here. Oh, it's about a 10-minute walk from, we know, where police say that this incident really intensified. So at the Yonge and Shepherd intersection there. What else is there? A number of restaurants, a Starbucks, a Tim Hortons. There is a shopping center there as well. So a number of people would have been there. Again, 10 minutes walk, and we know that 2 people from this Invesco company were impacted by this particular incident that happened. We do also have some video to share with our viewers of the arrest that took place. Toronto police confirming that they have arrested a suspect in this, and we do want to share that video with our viewers so that they have a little bit more context here for what vehicle the suspect was allegedly driving and how this interaction took place between the suspect and police as well. So this is some arrest video that, again, was taken from social media, but gone through all of our channels to ensure that it is okay to air here. But again, as we've talked about before, you can see here that he appears to be standing, appears to be in all right physical condition. We heard from the Sunnybrook Hospital spokesperson that he is unaware of the suspect being treated at their trauma center. But we did hear from the Deputy Police Chief from Toronto Police that there is an extensive investigation underway now into who this suspect was, what the motivation was, whether or not this was an attack or an accident. Certainly, I heard from one of the witnesses that we were speaking to earlier that he said there was no swerving. It was a direct drive on the sidewalk. That's a witness account. We should also make mention that there's a federal passport office right around here too. So some witnesses saying that the van was seen coming from that direction. A lot of questions still as we continue to digest and look into what happened.
All right, Arthi, thank you very much. We're going to play you some video now that was taken by a bystander, obtained by CBC News. And again, we believe that this angle shows the arrest of the suspect. And that suspect appears to be holding something and pointing it towards police. We, of course, don't know what that is, but take a look.
Come on, get down!
So that is video of the arrest of the suspect. And keep in mind, although the authorities are saying that there is still a lot of investigation to be done here, no indication at all that they're looking for other suspects. I mean, they are presumably going to be looking for people who may have known what the plan was going to be by that driver, but we've received no indication at all from any of the authorities that that there's a particular person right now they're looking for, and that the person that they arrested, they feel confident, is the driver of the van that led to that attack. And so we'll continue our coverage here. We do have reporters on the scene. We've been talking to Jacqueline Hansen, but we have other reporters as well who are gathering tape for us that we'll be seeing later tonight, particularly on the National. If you are watching us on CBC News Network, we will be continuing our breaking coverage of this incident right here. We are expecting another update from police and the Toronto Mayor, John Tory, soon. If you're watching us on CBC Television, we're about to hand over coverage to your local supper hour newscast. Before you go, a quick update on what we know right now. At 1:30 Eastern Time this afternoon, Toronto police received calls that a van was running into people on Yonge Street, quite far north of the downtown area, just south of Finch Avenue. Still no word yet of motive, but the driver is in custody. At this time, we know that 9 people are dead, 16 more are injured, and a number of those injured are in critical condition. We will, of course, have complete coverage of this story tonight on the National, and you can get all the information you need to know on this story, including information about the police hotlines on our website, CBCNews.ca. And for those of you who are watching on CBC News Network, we'll continue our coverage after the top of the hour. I know that some of you who are watching, because you've tweeted this to us, are concerned about what you feel is speculation, but we are being very, very careful to tell you what we know and then tell you what seem to be the suggestions from the authorities at this point, because I think it's important that when, for example, Mayor John Tory is talking to us and mentioning the importance of inclusion, the importance of diversity, the importance of keeping calm in the city, it suggests that he is concerned, as more information gets out about this incident, that there, people will be angry. Already people are wondering what exactly the motive was for this incident involving the van and the pedestrians at Yonge and Finch. I'm Ian Hanamansing. We're live on CBC News Network, and our coverage continues of this incident at Yonge and Finch. A van plowing into passengers, 9 people dead, 16 injured. This happened on a sidewalk in the north end of the city.
It looks like a movie. It hits a people and people like fly, things like that. It was super scary, yeah.
Toronto Police Service has mobilized all available resources.
Our hearts and our thoughts and our prayers go out to the families of those involved and to their friends and co-workers. I want to assure people that the city is in safe hands at the moment and that they're continuing with their investigation.
Witnesses describing a horrific scene, with this incident beginning around 1:30 this afternoon Eastern Time. Victims lying in the road and the sidewalk, bystanders performing CPR. Police saying that the van driver is in custody, arrested after a brief standoff. An investigation, of course, underway, and many questions still unanswered. We have extensive coverage of this incident, including from reporters who are on the scene, and that includes the CBC's Jacqueline Hansen, who joins us now. And Jacqueline, you've been watching the investigation unfold for a few hours. You're just on the edge of the police tape there. Describe for us what's happening right now.
Yeah, so I'm standing right next to Yonge Street. So that's what we've been talking about all afternoon here. So just to my right or north is Finch, and just to my left or south would be Shepherd. It's quite a long stretch of street here that is completely blocked off with police tape, which in, Toronto, this is not normally what Yonge Street looks like in this section. It's usually quite busy. It's not downtown. Pardon me? it's not downtown where, you know, we have the sort of the hecticness of downtown, but it has its own busyness up here in the north part of the city. And so in this section that is blocked off, we have police vehicles, we have a fire truck, and right now just behind me there are fire officials surrounding what looked to be a body that was covered with an orange tarp, and there is a coroner that's attending to that area right now. There were other tarps. We could see another one just south of here, and just behind me as well there is a drone that was flying at one point. They're trying to get an idea of just what happened in this area, but according to witnesses, this white van came down Yonge Street and was on the sidewalk, up on the curb, where it hit pedestrians in this area along Yonge. We did see officials. The officers are just moving behind me. We did see officials chalking areas down the curb, down the sidewalk, so really trying to get an idea of just what exactly happened here.
While you were talking, we were watching some tape from the area and taken by someone that we talked to a little earlier who was in a law office, and we could see in the sort of the immediate aftermath of people attending to some of the victims who were on the sidewalk. You've been speaking to people who at various points in the afternoon saw what happened there. What have they been telling you?
Yeah, I spoke to one witness in particular, and it really stood out to me. He said that he was in his vehicle and he saw the driver of the van in the van, and that he could really see his face and see his eyes, and he said that he looked quite angry and distraught. So that really stood out to him. And he said that the driver at one point had stopped, had put on the brakes, and then continued. So that stood out to him as well. Again, that's, you know, we're hearing from witnesses from their perspective and their recollection of the event. So we're trying to piece together what exactly happened, just as police are doing behind me.
All right, Jacqueline Hansen, thank you very much. We showed you just before the top of the hour some tape of the arrest that was taken by a bystander, obtained by CBC News. We believe this is tape of the arrest of the suspect. You have to watch really closely to get a sense of what's happening. The suspect appears to be holding something, appears to be pointing towards police. We don't know what that is, but take a look. So it kind of took me the second time of seeing that video to get a clearer sense of what was happening. So at the beginning, you see the van on the left-hand side of your screen. You see the person who's there, who's holding his hand out with something in his hand, and the police officer continuing to approach him and eventually arresting him. That video obtained by CBC News, taken by a civilian who was there, and it appears to be the moment that Toronto police apprehended the person who they believe was driving that van that killed 9 people and injured many others. Well, following the story along with me, my national co-host Rosemary Barton, who is in Ottawa. And Rosemary, you've been watching lots of elements of the story, including the political reaction. What do you have for us?
Well, can I go back to the video for a minute, Ian? Because it is so striking when you think about it. And maybe we can re-rack it and play it again. But there are some people coming out of a restaurant behind all of this who don't even seem to know what's going on at all. And it's one police officer who manages to take down this individual. And as you say, it's very unclear as to whether he's armed or whether he's just holding something in his hand in order to suggest that he has a weapon. But it doesn't take very long, and it doesn't take very much for the one police officer to neutralize him, to have him just down and handcuffed and arrested. That's some pretty amazing courage on the part of that police officer, but also some really impressive policing skills without having to fire a weapon or to engage in anything else with the person that we believe to be the suspect. So I expect that video will be watched closely again and again in the days ahead, because it's fairly astounding.
It really is. And Gary Clement, a longtime veteran RCMP officer, and he was also a municipal police chief, I believe, in Ontario. We're going to be speaking to him and one of the questions I'm going to have for him is exactly what you're raising there. I mean, as a police officer, when you're walking in and somebody's holding something up to you, if you think that's a gun, I think then that police officer would have reacted differently, but we can ask Gary when we speak to him in a moment. I assume you've been watching political reaction as well.
I haven't, and right now I must say that everything has sort of gone quiet, which isn't surprising to me. I would take that to believe that there are meetings happening and briefings happening with various officials and ministers who need to get up to speed on what they know and what intelligence officials and law authorities know right now about the situation. Just to sort of remind people of what we have heard from the government. We have heard directly from the Minister of Public Safety, who happened to be in Toronto meeting his counterparts, who happened to have a press conference scheduled for 4 p.m. Eastern, and that's when he came out to tell us that indeed there had been this incident and that there were casualties. Now we know that there were 9 people killed and 16 others injured. He did subsequently tweet and characterize this incident as a, quote, horrific attack. And by that, the minister apparently was referring to the scale of the attack, the number of people who died. He again pointing to the professionalism of Toronto Police and the first responders who got there again very quickly. I mean, we'll get to the timeline, I'm sure, in the days ahead, Ian. But if the initial calls went in at around, just after 1:30, this didn't take very long for responders to get to the scene and again for the suspect to be arrested. So that's probably part of the good news in all of this, is that it was quite quickly contained. The other thing that the public safety minister said was that the threat level in this country has not increased. So that means that there is no imminent threat that is likely. It remains at medium, which is where it was put after the Parliament Hill attack that happened, of course, back in 2014. And that they, at this stage, have no reason to believe that anyone is in imminent danger. Again, some good news in spite of all that we've heard today. I would point out that this is, as we've been saying, something we have seen frequently in other countries, vans being used to take people out, to use them as a weapon, essentially, a large weapon that you wouldn't know is coming at you. This seems to be what has happened today, just from what we're hearing from eyewitness accounts and from police. It is not the first time this has happened in Canada. There was an attempt at this in Edmonton, although no one was killed. In this instance, again, from what police are telling us and what witnesses are telling us, it did seem to be more targeted. And in a place in Toronto, again, where the weather was lovely, people were out walking down the street, and then this happened.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, and that was the clarification of what Ralph Goodale said when he used the word attack. To me, Rosemary, and I'm curious to hear your analysis of this, I think it speaks to the sensitivity, how every word really matters in an incident like this, at a time like this. When he said attack, really all I read into that was a deliberate or a likely deliberate act by the person driving the van, motive aside. And so we didn't have to call it just an incident or an accident, it was an attack. But it was his office that contacted the media, or how did that clarification come out of his use of the word attack?
Yeah, I think we contacted just to make sure we were understanding it correctly. I think a lot of times you associate attack with terrorism, and no one has used that word yet, nor are we using it because we don't have any indication that that's how we should describe it. We certainly seem to have a suggestion from police that there was intent here, that this wasn't sort of a random act or that it wasn't an accident, right? It was something more than that. So I would expect that when we get our next briefing from Toronto Police, which we will get in the coming hours, when we finally hear again from the federal government, either the Prime Minister or Minister Goodale, that the language might go a little bit further in terms of trying to understand what happened. And of course, that will come from not only eyewitness accounts, police are talking to many of those people, but also from the suspect himself, who is in custody, who may or may not be cooperating, but that may give us an indication about what motivation was here, and then will allow everyone to sort of characterize the incident one way or another.
So I'm not sure if you're able to see a monitor where you are, Rosemary, and whether that monitor is on a delay or not, but we are watching that video again. On the left-hand side of the screen is the person who we believe is the driver or the suspected driver holding something in his hand. Again, I don't know if you can see it, but you may want to speak to your point that you were mentioning earlier.
Well, even the way you can see him gesturing with whatever he has in his hand as though he's going to put it back in and take it out, it certainly looks like there's some sort of weapon, even if there isn't. So the police officer, you can see, is obviously being very cautious when he approaches the suspect. There's those people just sort of walking close to this without realizing that this is happening, because this is not a common thing in Canada, and certainly not in Toronto. And then there is a lapse there in the video because the person who's filming it sort of puts their phone down for a moment and brings it up. But very quickly then the police officer goes from standing, with a weapon out to quickly getting the suspect on the ground and handcuffed without anything more having to happen or without putting anyone else in danger. So I look forward to you hearing what Gary Clement has to say about that, because it does seem to be some pretty remarkable bit of policing that he's manages to do that alone. And I have to say, for the passerby who took that video, which CBC has obtained, to have the presence of mind, and I know some people watching may consider it foolhardy, but to have the presence of mind to be rolling on that and to allow us to see it. And in fact, authorities probably will want to see that video as well. For sure. All, a remarkable moment that happened not long ago, and that we get to see it firsthand. Rosemary, thank you. We'll be coming back to you very soon. Sounds good. All right, we are live here on CBC News Network. And so Gary is Gary Clement, a former RCMP investigator, longtime veteran of the RCMP, joins us now from Cobourg, Ontario. And let's start, first of all, with this incident. Your reaction when you first heard of it, Gary?
Well, I would think for me, it had hallmarks of 9/11. I was in the Ottawa area at the time. We had to open our National Operations Center, and I said at that time, our world changed. I think we all have to agree it did. This here, I think, is another example of showing that we're not immune. And you look at Canada and we think we're such a comfortable, friendly place, and especially on finally getting rid of the weather we've been experiencing back east, and have a beautiful day and have this happen. It's shocking, I think, for anybody to not think in a way that we just got over the Humboldt tragedy, and now we've got a real tragedy here with individuals who are going to go through a rough few days in the days ahead.
And so at this point, where we have the apparent driver in custody, the police do, we have no idea if he's speaking to police or not, but give us a sense of what kinds of things are likely happening, drawing on your long experience with the RCMP. What are investigators likely doing right now?
Well, and I can only surmise on this, but I would venture a guess that the National Operations Center is now open in Ottawa. It would surprise me that the RCMP didn't open that. That's where they correlate all the information and would work very closely with Toronto Police. The intelligence agencies will all be involved in the key things now are to find out as much information about this individual as all possible. There'll be, I'm sure in the coming hours, there'll be a lot of warrants issued, getting phone records and the like. They'll have searches done. They'll be seeking financial records. all of these things are important because at the start of this their investigation, all they know they've arrested somebody that definitely, it has all the hallmarks of an attack of some sort, whether it's a copycat or it is actually an event that may prove to be of some terrorist activity. We can't say that now, and I'm not trying to indicate it is, but it has those hallmarks. So, this is going to be a very long but a very intense investigation, and they're going to make sure that everything they do in the coming hours is measured and very proactive, because it has to be.
I want to ask you kind of an operational policing question. Have you seen the video that we've been playing of what appears to be the arrest of the driver?
Yes, I did, Ian.
And so you have a guy, the driver, holding something in his hand. We can't tell from where we are what it is, but we're watching the video now. The police officer on the right-hand side of the screen is advancing without any sort of cover. He's just standing there in the street, advancing with his gun drawn. That suggests to me that he doesn't think that driver has a gun in his hand, but what's your perspective on that?
Well, it's a couple. First of all, it's quite apparent. I mean, just from what appears to be the alleged statements of the individual, it appears that he was trying to have suicide by cop, as it's obvious, or is usually referred to. I think the officer, and I have to commend how he handled that. First of all, he has the best view of anybody because he's looking straight at the individual. So he obviously knows what's in his hand, but the fact that the individual appears to try to get him to shoot him is an indication it is suicide by police officer. And, I think he's taken the right approach to it. I mean, he's gone at it knowing that this individual wants to shoot him and has not really taken it, in the little bit that we can see, isn't taking any overt action that would appear to be a threatening gesture. So I think the officer, demonstrates his maturity, his ability to read a situation, and he reacted accordingly.
Yeah, you and I have talked many times live on the air before on CBC News Network, and you're quite candid when you feel an officer has overreacted or not reacted properly, and so your assessment here, I think, bears repeating. That there was remarkable calm and composure, it appears, by this officer managing to take this suspect in custody without firing a shot.
Absolutely. It definitely shows he was a very mature and an officer that could read a situation, and we oftentimes, as you know, Ian, we don't give our officers enough credit, and this is an example of somebody who did an extraordinary job.
And it'll probably make a huge difference going forward with this investigation. Gary, it's always nice having your analysis on stories with a policing and an investigative component. Thank you very much for speaking with us this evening.
Thanks, Ian.
Gary Clement, former RCMP investigator, and he is in Cobourg, Ontario. Well, we heard Rosemary earlier talk about Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale's reaction. He spoke at the G7 ministers meeting, which is occurring actually in Toronto today, and let's listen to some of what he had to say.
We cannot come to any firm conclusions at this stage. The police are conducting, obviously, their thorough investigation to determine exactly what happened and why it happened, the motivations involved. But until they are able to provide us with details that put this completely in a factual context, it would be inappropriate to speculate. I can, though, say that there is complete cooperation and collaboration among all of the relevant police organizations to make sure that all the appropriate resources are made available and that we get the answers that you and the public would want just as rapidly as possible. There is no information available to me at the present time that would indicate a change in the risk level. The appropriate authorities of the Government of Canada, in collaboration with all of their relevant law enforcement partners, are constantly assessing and reassessing the nature of risk in the country from whatever source it may come. If they conclude that a change is appropriate, that decision is made by the key senior officials within the Government of Canada. But there is no information, and I think it's important to state this, there is no information available to me at the present time that would lead us to conclude that there should be a change in risk level.
Well, both from Ralph Goodale, the Public Safety Minister, and also from John Tory, the Mayor of Toronto, an appeal for calm and caution and care in reacting to this story. But what is beyond doubt is that a terrible thing has happened in Toronto this afternoon at around 1:30 Eastern Time. A van plowing in to a series of pedestrians just happened to be on the street, and of those pedestrians, 5 are in critical condition, 3 are serious, and of course a number of them have died. 9 people killed in this incident. Arthi Pole is here in the studio with me. What do you have?
Well, this is some information that is coming from Reuters, and so we want to be clear here that this is not information that CBC News has independently verified, but Reuters is citing a U.S. source that officials are examining terrorism as a motive. Again, this is a Reuters report where they are citing the use of a U.S. source, indicating here that investigators are examining terrorism as the likely motive behind this van attack. Given the information that we have now, we are calling it an attack, a van attack. We know 9 people were killed, and the investigation is underway. Some other notes here just to make. We know that the police have set up a command center. We expect there may be more information coming out of there. The Premier of Ontario is heading to that command center. In addition to that, when it comes to the city officials, the mayor has said that they will be setting up 2 hotlines for people to get in touch with police, to get in touch with other authorities, to get a status on loved ones. The Toronto city sign will be dimmed. The flags will be flown at half-mast as well. So we know that those are some of the latest updates on that. But of course, for people who are just tuning in, this occurred at about 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Police say that a van jumped the curb and struck a number of pedestrians, 16 injured, 9 dead. Now, we do have a clip from a construction worker who was at the scene shortly after it all happened. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Sirens and everything, and I look out the window, I saw that guy lying over there dead from upstairs. So
you were upstairs,
yeah,
on the construction site.
Yeah, I was on the 4th floor and I saw everything. So.
All right, so that was one of the people who was in the area. It was a very busy time of day around lunchtime. This is an area where there is a shopping center. There are a number of restaurants. There's a gym nearby. We also know that Invesco is a company and a financial company in that area, and they have said that 2 of their employees were impacted by this. We are waiting, of course, to get more information about the victims, about those who are injured, but the witnesses are also coming forward too and describing an absolutely horrific scene when they came here to this intersection, Yonge and Shepherd, in the north part of the city of Toronto, and saw people's clothing and shoes and bodies at the intersection. Take a listen to this one witness.
I saw the van exactly in the sidewalk. It hits people, looks like movies, like it hits the people and people flying. And then I saw 5 or 6 bodies from this location until Byng Street. It was like 4 and 5 people on the ground, and people were screaming and yelling.
Take a listen to that. Just an absolutely panicked, chaotic situation. As we know, still a developing story. Officials still looking into what exactly happened. We know, as we've been talking about, the driver, the suspect who was behind the wheel of this van, has been arrested by police.
Think back to what Gary Clement said. There's a guy who's been a police officer for a long, long time. And he talked about how this was such a nice day in Toronto. And it's true, right? It's just like the whole mood in the city was so buoyant really the last couple of days, and then all of a sudden to be thrust in the middle of this. And he also talked about Humboldt, you know, a tragedy that just moved people to tears right across the country, and we're certainly not over that yet, but at least some time has passed, and then all of a sudden, 9 people, it's just a number right now, but we're going to start getting names and faces, and we're going to hear the stories of people. All they were doing is walking on a sidewalk on a beautiful afternoon, and they were killed in a circumstance that they could never have imagined anywhere, especially in Canada. And some people might be wondering, how is it that we're quoting Reuters mentioning terrorism? A couple of things you need to keep in mind is Arthi was very careful in what you said. Like, this is, a respected news agency. We have not verified this, but we can tell you that this is what they're reporting. And there have been some other cases, particularly involving European attacks, where key information came out from the United States, because a lot of these intelligence services share information, and the Americans tend to be more forthcoming with their information than European countries and Canadian countries. Is the Reuters report correct? We won't know, but at least you're passing that on. But what are we saying at this point? We are calling this an attack, not implying that it's terrorism, but implying that it was not an accident. An attack is a word that the public safety minister used, and so we use it in that limited context. So it's important to understand what we mean when we say that. Our live coverage continues here on CBC News Network. We're coming up to 6:30 Eastern Time. So many people watching the story very closely, of course, including the Prime Minister, and he was asked to comment on this on his way into question period.
Obviously, we're just learning about the situation in Toronto. Our hearts go to everyone affected. We're going to obviously have more to learn and more to say in the coming hours.
And we expect to hear from some federal officials or senior ministers later on today, whether that's the Prime Minister or one of the senior ministers. We're not sure. I want to read you part of a statement from the Mayor of Toronto, John Tory, who says, "Our city denounces this and all acts of violence, and we are united in our grief." That's just a portion of a statement that he made. He also is asking people to avoid speculation and to await results of the police investigation. And I'm already getting notes from people saying that on social media there is speculation run rampant about who is responsible and why they're responsible. And we are, of course, being careful to filter through all of that. And we're thinking very carefully before we pass on the information that we have passed on to you. Rosemary Barton is in our Ottawa Bureau. Let's bring her in once again. Rosie.
Yeah, just one final thought on this before I let you close it out there, Ian. Just a reminder that the government has not increased the threat level, which should, I think, reassure some Canadians about what the government, what intelligence officials know about this incident. They obviously feel that things are relatively still safe in Canada, which is some comfort, I guess, on a difficult day. I would expect as well that we will hear from either the Prime Minister, the Minister of Public Safety, or someone in some form as the evening goes on, and as we get a little bit more clarity around what this was, who this person is, and possible motivation behind the attack. But as you and I have been discussing for a number of hours now, no one is using the word accident. And so we at least know that this was some sort of targeted or intentional attack, and that will be something that authorities and the federal government will have to speak to more in the hours ahead.
There is a lot of work going on, including here at CBC News. Rosemary, you and I can go and get ready for the National later tonight. We have reporters who are out in the field who are gathering tape and talking to people, so let's hand over this broadcast now to Carol McNeil. We're expecting another update from Toronto Police and the Toronto Mayor John Tory in the coming hours, and of course you can follow all breaking news right here on CBC News Network and on CBCNews.ca, and extensive coverage coming up on the National. As I mentioned, Carol McNeil will pick up this developing story right after this.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carol McNeil. Welcome to a special edition of CBC News Network tonight. We are covering the van attack in uptown Toronto today. Police say 9 people are dead and 16 injured after a van plowed into pedestrians. The driver of the vehicle is under arrest tonight. Who is the man in custody? What was his blood alcohol level, if any? What did he say? His motivation? Who are the victims? Their age, their gender? All questions to be determined. We're hoping to hear from the Toronto Police Service again tonight. Investigators also appealing to the public for information related to this incident. And you can see the dramatic takedown in those pictures of the man who was driving the van, brought under police control by one police officer. More about that a little later. Toronto's mayor saying the area around the attack could be affected for days while this investigation goes on. The CBC's Jacqueline Hansen on the scene, joining me now live. Jacqueline, what's happening there right now?
Well, it is still a very active investigation that's happening here right now. Carol, you mentioned that it's going to be closed off for quite some time. That's also what police here confirmed with us, that they really have no idea when they'll be wrapped up of what they're investigating here. I'm standing right by Yonge Street. This is Yonge Street behind me. Just to my right, or just north of here, is Finch, and to my left or south is Shepherd. So this entire section of the street is blocked off. There's a lot of police tape everywhere, keeping people out. And what we've seen happening is police officials walking up and down the street here, up and down the sidewalk, where they're marking areas and marking it with some orange. It looks like sort of chalk that they've been marking. There's also a drone that they were operating. It was in the air a couple of times so far. They seem to be surveying the area, trying to get a real sense of what exactly happened. We're hearing that the van drove down Yonge Street, drove south on Yonge Street, hitting pedestrians along the way. But of course, we still need to know a lot more about the details of how exactly this all happened.
Yeah, so many pictures that we have seen today, people who've taken video, not only our cameras as you're looking at now, and as you can see, the orange covering representing a deceased person. Very, very sad situation.
Yes.
A lot of people having recorded this on social media as well. Are there a lot of people still watching this investigation tonight?
Absolutely. You know, it's right after work now, about 6:30 Eastern time here in Toronto. So there are a lot of people that are coming up to the police tape to see what exactly is going on. I spoke to one man whose car is trapped in this area. He also says that he saw the incident happen, and he was here to meet his wife, and he was, you know, quite afraid, quite nervous about her safety when this event was happening. Luckily, they were united eventually, but he's waiting for his car. There are lots of people who live in this area. We're just north of Yonge and Eglinton, which is just booming in terms of condo development and housing development there, and it's working its way up here as well. There's lots of towers just behind me. A lot of people need to get home tonight, but of course, this section, as we've been talking about, is blocked off currently. So they'll be needing to look for some sort of workarounds in terms of getting home.
Yeah, and the mayor's saying today that if you don't need to, don't go to the area. The CBC's Jacqueline Hansen in Toronto, thank you so much. As I said, so many people bearing witness to this traumatic event, watching the violence unfold. Some tried to help. I want to play for you now 3 witness accounts of what they saw and did today.
I saw like the crazy van, like a rental van, hitting the people one after one, and there was I saw the old man going up and going down. That's and the people scream and going around. The police came to help the people.
I'm rendering help to this individual, and I see 2 other injured on the other side. There are another 2 people who have been injured on the other side.
I saw the van exactly in the sidewalk. It hits people, looks like a movies, like it used to be people and people flying. And then I saw 5 or 6 bodies from this location until Bingy Street. It was like 4 and 5 people on the ground, and people were screaming and yelling.
All right, those were witnesses who saw the horrific attack today, approximately 1:30 Eastern Time in the Yonge and Finch uptown area of Toronto. John Tory releasing a statement just moments ago, the mayor of Toronto. My heart goes out to the families and loved ones of the 9 people killed and 16 injured in today's cowardly and incomprehensible attack in Toronto. The Toronto Police Service, Toronto paramedics responded quickly and with great professionalism. Right now, I want to play for you a representative from the Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto, where many of the injured were taken to. Last hour, we heard from an official there, Dr. Dan Cass, the Executive Vice President to the Chief Medical Officer. Take a listen.
Sunnybrook has received a total of 10 victims from the incident today in the area of Yonge and Finch. Unfortunately, 2 of those patients arrived vital signs absent and have been pronounced dead on arrival. We currently have 5 patients in critical condition and 3 in serious condition. For members of the public who may be concerned that their loved ones were involved in this incident, you may contact our Family Information and Support Center. The telephone number is 416-480-4940. That's again 416-480-4940. Sunnybrook would like to thank the first responders, emergency medical services, police services, and the many teams in our hospital who have responded to this situation. Thank you.
Doctor, are any of the victims or any of the people you're treating right now children?
The victims that we have here are adults.
What can you tell us about the 2 people who succumbed to their injuries?
I don't have details about any of the injuries, either in the 2 individuals who were pronounced deceased or in the ones who are still receiving care at this time.
But they've been positively identified and their family has been notified, the 2 victims who are deceased?
Still in a process of identification and confirming identification. As I mentioned, if family members believe that they may have someone who's been impacted by this, there's a telephone number which I can read again at the end of the statement to contact if they wish further information or how they can proceed here to assist further.
The CBC's Natalie Collada was at the news conference at Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto. She joins me now. Natalie, that was interesting because I should make it clear for the audience that this was, as I understand, the Executive Vice President to the Chief Medical Officer, and as a result, he didn't have direct contact with patients, so we're still missing some key details.
That's right, and we still at this hour, Carol, are missing those details. They are, as you can imagine, very busy inside dealing with the patients who have been brought here. Of course, we, as you have just heard, 10 in total. We know 2 have deceased, 5 are in critical condition, 3 are in serious condition, and we can tell you that one of those 3 that are in serious condition, that was upgraded, that they were originally thought to be in fair condition, and then of course that was upgraded to serious as things progress, and that is what people inside, doctors, nurses, practitioners will be dealing with in terms of the extent of the injuries that they're dealing with here at the hospital. We are still unclear as to what they are. We know they are wide-ranging given the fact of the conditions and the level of conditions that they are brought in, ranging of course from critical to serious. So serious conditions, what they are, we don't know at this point. As you can imagine, people are very busy. I can tell you Toronto police detectives have been inside. That happened in the last hour. They have gone inside, presumably to speak with some of those victims. We are waiting to find out more information, and of course the big thing for the hospital here who are dealing with these victims is to try and contact those individuals, those family members of those who are deceased and those who are inside who they have not been able to identify, who they have not been able to contact those family members. So that is right now what is happening inside. The other thing we learned is that the emergency department itself, while it is open to patients, is on a version of a lockdown for security purposes out of an abundance of caution. Again, that is to try and prioritize and limit the amount of people walking through, but also to, of course, make sure that those who are there are getting the kind of care that they need. Carol?
All right. The CBC's Natalie Collada. Natalie, thank you so much. I want to play for you the video now that was taken by a bystander and obtained by CBC News. We believe it is authentic in that it shows the arrest of the suspect. It may be a video that you've seen many times today. The suspect appears to be holding something and pointing it toward police. We do not know what it is, but let's take a look at this video right now. Okay, let's analyze this video. It was obtained by CBC News, taken by a bystander, and again, we believe it's authentic, showing the moment that Toronto police apprehended the person whose van killed 9 people and injured 16 others. We are speaking with people who view this story through various lenses, and Phil Gursky is a former strategic analyst with CSIS, Canada's National Intelligence Services. Right now, we are calling this an attack, but we don't know the motive or inspiration for it. Mr. Gursky, first of all, given the fact there is still a lot we don't know, what do you think would be the first steps for investigators? What are they doing today?
Well, I imagine they're talking to the suspect if he's cooperating, and they're going to get him to tell them why he did what he did, what his motivation was, what he was angry about, what he may have held a grievance about, why he chose that particular venue in Toronto, why he decided to rent a van, how far in advance was this planned, and to get some idea as to what the motivation was, because until we know motivation, what we have now is what appears to be a deliberate attack with a vehicle to mow down people. That's all we know. We can't go any further than that.
Okay. Phil, what do you make of the video that we just saw?
In terms of the takedown, well, I never worked as a police officer, but from what I've seen, it shows an incredible degree of professionalism, and it's kudos to Toronto Police Services in the training of their officers. He acted in a fantastic way. He wasn't forced to shoot the suspect. He was able to arrest them. And of course, if you arrest somebody as opposed to shoot to kill, you can start asking questions and find out more.
Yeah. The thing about this, I mean, you and I both have never been in this situation, but just watching it and his arms now coming up as if he is going to shoot that police officer. And the police officer, what do you make of his reaction at that point? Nobody knows it's a cell phone.
It's fantastic, and you know, thankfully for the officer and the rest of Toronto Police Services and the officer's family and friends, you know, he wasn't shot at and he wasn't wounded, and he's able to neutralize a suspect who just, you know, ran people over. So again, I tip my hat to the officer. This was a fantastic show of courage under extreme pressure, and I think that he did a fantastic job, and he should be commended for that.
I also imagine that they would be, as you say, interviewing the man in custody, but they may not get anything from him. I mean, would they be looking at things like his blood alcohol level, looking through his computers, talking to his family, his friends, trying to put a picture of where he has been mentally and physically in the last number of days?
You're right. He may not be cooperating, but whether you work in intelligence or law enforcement, the first thing you're going to find out, they probably have a name thanks to a driver's license or thanks to a rental agreement for the van. You're going to run that name through your databases. You know, has he come on our radar before for any other reason? Does he have a criminal record? Is he known to CSIS? Is he known to the RCMP? Is he known to Toronto Police? Is he known to other police in the GTA? And then you're going to start to, you know, maybe get a warrant to look at his communications. And a judge would grant a warrant pretty quickly in this case, I would think. In terms of his social media, that stuff's already open, as we learned from Facebook last week in Washington, right? Anyone can look at your Facebook page. Did he post something? Did he tweet something? Did he share something with somebody? So they're going to look at a whole bunch of things: family, friends, workmates if he works, if he was married, those types of things to determine what did anyone know? Was there were there signs? Were there things that had gone off the rails recently with this man that might shed some kind of light as to why he did what he did?
And in a way, you do hope there were signs that someone missed so that maybe the next attack could be prevented.
Well, absolutely. You know, I worked in radicalization of violence at CSIS for 15 years, and we looked at these types of behavioral indicators, and they're always there. And people dismiss them or don't understand them. And what we try to do is simply educate people. You know, if you see these things, doesn't mean the end of the world, but it means that something's going on with someone, either emotionally or psychologically. There's some kind of pressure in their life. Don't ignore these things. Talk to somebody, whether it's law enforcement or whatever, you know, healthcare professionals. But don't shove this aside as, oh, he's just having a bad day, or I don't want to get involved. And so that's why we talk about these things, is so that we maybe can prevent the next attack, you know, that's analogous to what happened in Toronto today.
Yeah. And has happened so many other places before this, including London, including the United States and elsewhere in the world. It has certainly caught the attention of the American police. The New York Counterterrorism Group, for instance, is keeping an eye on this situation, liaising with Toronto. They want to know what's going on. As I understand it, this is no longer just a local police investigation. It involves other levels of investigators in this country as well.
Well, it would, by definition. I mean, you know, we have great partners. We have a great set of relationships here in Canada between the RCMP, you know, with CSIS, where I used to work, with local law enforcement, with our allies, with the Americans and the Brits and the Australians and allies in a bunch of countries, and they all want to help. If they have information that can help the lead investigator in this case, which I think is still Toronto Police, although it may become the RCMP if there's some kind of ideological motivation behind it, our allies want to help us. And if they have some piece of information that can be one piece of the puzzle that helps us understand what happened, they're going to share it with us. So we're going to be very thankful for those relationships.
Phil Gursky is former strategic analyst for CSIS. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We'll be right back. All right, we're back. We're going to join Vashi Capellos, host of CBC's Power and Politics in Ottawa. She has been working the phones tonight. Vashi, you've been speaking to sources in the federal government that have been briefed on this attack. What are you hearing?
Hey, Carol. Yeah, we've spoken to two sources who have been briefed on the information presented to this point, and I want to emphasize it's the information they have at this point. But what they do believe right now is that this situation does not pose a greater threat to national security, that there isn't necessarily a connection to a more conventional terror group. It doesn't mean that it can't be a terror investigation or that there may be some links, but they don't believe the situation is linked to something larger that would be a bigger threat to national security. And that's probably why you saw the Minister Ralph Goodale, Public Safety Minister, earlier say that they have not changed the threat level in Canada. It remains at medium.
Yeah, we have heard from, as you know well, you've been following it, Vashi, from the federal, some of the federal ministers, and including, and obviously, the Public Safety Minister.
Yes, we have heard from the Public Safety Minister. Not a lot of information when he first spoke. It was a little while ago, but he did emphasize at that point that the terror threat level hadn't changed. And basically, I know you have been reporting on it for the whole afternoon, but the threat level is at medium here. It has been since just a few days before the Parliament Hill attack back in 2014. It's remained at medium ever since. And I want to be clear that that actually means something. We're one of the few countries that doesn't publicly say when the threat level changes. You can ask the minister, but there's no sort of process by which the public gets notified. But a medium threat level means that a violent act of terrorism could occur versus a low level of a threat, which means that it's possible but unlikely. So there is a very big difference, and it is important to note that it has been at that level since the October 2014 attacks.
All right, Vashi Capellos, the host of CBC's Power and Politics, normally seen at this time. Vashi, thank you.
You're welcome.
Toronto's mayor is urging people to stay away from the site of the incident unless they live in the uptown Toronto area. Mayor John Tory issuing a statement a little earlier tonight, sending out his condolences to those who were affected by the attack at Yonge and Finch, saying, "My heart goes out to the families and loved ones of the 9 people killed and 16 injured in today's cowardly and incomprehensible attack in Toronto." Here's what more he had to say earlier in the day.
That this is a time when this community should come together. These are not the kinds of things that we expect to happen in this city. We hope they don't happen anywhere in the world, but we especially don't expect them to happen in Toronto. But things are as they are, and beyond supporting our first responders as they continue to do their work, and you'll hear more about the task that lies in front of them investigating this terrible tragedy, I hope that we will as a city remind ourselves of the fact that we are admired around the world for being inclusive and for being accepting and understanding and considerate, and that we are united in standing in solidarity, especially with those who have fallen victim to this terrible tragedy today. Now, I have some very practical matters, and I just want to look at my notes to make sure that I don't forget any of these. But I want to convey a number of things to the people of the City of Toronto, especially people in this area. First of all, we're asking people who live here or who work here, please do not come to this area if you're not already here. The police and the other first responders have a lot of work to do on a very complicated investigation, and it just helps with the task they have in front of them if people are not in this area. Secondly, we've asked, and we are asking, that all of the businesses and buildings that are office buildings where people work during the day, that those people would, in an orderly fashion, close those businesses for the remainder of the day.
That was Toronto Mayor John Tory urging people to stay calm and asking them to stay away from the area. The Premier of Ontario also spoke to reporters about what happened in Toronto. She spoke earlier this evening. Here is Kathleen Wynne.
I've been briefed by the provincial security advisor, and what I want people to know is that all levels of government and police services are working together. So the OPP and the RCMP and the Toronto Police Service, all levels are working together, and the information is flowing among those organizations. This is a situation where whoever has information is sharing it with the different police services. There's no gap there, and I will continue to get updates. And as there is more information, that will be shared by the appropriate level of police service.
Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne speaking earlier today. All right, breaking news. Breaking news for you. The name of the alleged driver of the rental van in the Toronto attack, we can tell you now, is Alec Manassian, a 25-year-old man from Richmond Hill, Ontario, north of Toronto. His LinkedIn profile says he is a student at Seneca College. The man, we believe in this video, this was taken earlier today by a bystander, a confrontation between the man who drove that van at Yonge and Finch, mowing down several people, an incident in which 9 people died, 16 people were injured. Now, in that video, being confronted by a Toronto police officer, waving at him as if he's pointing a gun at him. We know now it was not a gun, it was a cell phone. The police officer keeping his calm and then eventually moves in and conducts the takedown. That person has been identified to us, the driver of the rental van, Alec Manassian, 25 years old, from Richmond Hill, Ontario, north of Toronto. His LinkedIn profile says he is a student at Seneca College. You're watching CBC News Network tonight. I'm Carol McNeil. Our special coverage continues right after this.